Chapter 91. The Gathering of Geniuses Within the Premises of Yuan School Main Sect. One could see demon birds flying everywhere, carrying the disciples. The crowd of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool responded with curiosity in their eyes, looking excitingly at this scene. But soon, the demon birds flew towards the foot of the full moon mountain peak. Only the elders and true disciples were allowed to fly over the full moon peak, and others could only go up from the foot of the mountain. Lin Zhantian did not go with them, but directly jumped off from his demon bird and vanished in front of everyone. Everyone went towards the plaza of Full Moon Peak, where disciples from over 100 subschools were arriving one after another. Over 100 subschools, even if each subschool had only a few dozens of people. But after adding them up, the total number would go up to thousands of people. The good thing was that the plaza was very wide, and at the moment, it was filled with many shadows. These were the masters of the Hotian ninth stage, who were once the core disciples of their respective subschools. This gathering was truly magnificent and spectacular, far more than the gathering of competitions held at various subschools. And of course, compared to the geniuses present in the gathering for the competitions, the quality of talent here was undoubtedly much higher. Each of these subschools had elite disciples, and all of them had dignified appearance, especially the Xiantian-level disciples. All of them were upright and very conceited. After all, they had already entered into the Xiantian realm before joining the main sect. To be able to become a Xiantian master was an incredible achievement for the subschool disciples, and they were considered elite among the elites. Yi Ruxia was the latest addition to the group of Xiantian masters of the Qingfeng Mountain subschools. Including her, now there were a total of 4 Xiantian masters, which was an unforeseen achievement in the history of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. Although there were a lot of strong opponents with many strong subschools, but some subschools were quite miserable, with only a single Xiantian master. With over 100 subschools arrived for the assessment, the strength of each subschools was not the same. The strength of some was almost comparable to the 3 major subschools. It's truly spectacular. Wu Hao sighed with emotion and said, now these disciples had truly realized that their own road to practice, in the main sect, was finally going to begin, and that there were several stronger people in the world. This scenery was going to encourage their unceasing progress. At this time, Yi Shiwen saw the people of 3 major subschools standing in front. Standing on the left were the people of Bingdao Subschool, led by a man with an extraordinary temperament. Yi Shiwen did not know, but this guy was the well-known Shengguan Xuani, one of the strongest 3 disciples of this year, with an unfathomable strength. Next to the group of Bingdao Subschool was also a large group of people with each one of their disciples in the Xiantian realm. The group belonged to one of the 3 major subschools, Shenhuashan Subschool. It was located in the southern part of the state, next to a volcano, and its disciples practice fire attribute power techniques, making them a stark contrast with the disciples of Bingdao Subschool. These 2 subschools had always been consistent rivals, thanks to their ranks as one of the major subschools, and also the opposing nature of their power techniques. In short, these 2 subschools were inherently hostile towards each other, and also held mutual hatred. In front of the group of Divine Volcano Subschool, there was a man, standing proudly with an appearance of approximately 25-year-old. He was an abnormally burly man, and Yi Shiwen found out that this man was named Yin Chiling. Similar to Shengguan Xuani, he also had an unfathomable strength. On the other side of the group of Divine Volcano Subschool, the group of 3rd Major Subschool was standing. This group belonged to the Yunu Subschool. As the name suggested, all the disciples in this major subschool were females. The group consisted of many beautiful young female students, and all of them looked very attractive, and they had also grabbed the attraction of most of the male disciples. Their leader looked roughly 18 to 19-year-old, dressed in yellow clothes flapping in the wind, long hair, and had a delicate jade-like skin. 2 strands of hair were gently flowing by the wind over her cheeks, which were complementing her seductive appearance even more. This was the genius female disciple of Jade Lady Subschool, and was named Zhangsun Yuyin. It was said that few years ago, she had easily stepped into the Xiantian realm, and no one knew what her cultivation level was now. Zhangsun Yuan, Yin Qiliang and Shengguan Shuani, were said to be the three strongest disciples of this year, and each of them had unfathomable strength. Although other disciples would have to wait as they did not know which vein they might join, but that was not the case for the disciples of Jade Lady Subschool, because it was already fixed for them. Jade Lady Subschool was a subsidiary of Yuan School's Jade Lady Mountain Peak, so all the disciples were going to join the Jade Lady Mountain Peak in the future. And the reason was that Jade Lady Mountain Peak only accepted female disciples, while Jade Lady Subschool had been established by a previous senior of Jade Lady Mountain Peak. So it was only obvious for the disciples of the Jade Lady Subschool to join Jade Lady Mountain Peak. So relatively speaking, they didn't need to participate in this assessment. In addition to these three subschools, there were some other first-class subschools, having more than 10 disciples, who had already entered into the Xiantian realm. And then, there were middle-level subschools like Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. Lastly, there were subschools with only 1 or 2 sub-Xiantian masters. In this world, where strength was the supreme law and truth, only strong could command respect. Zhangsun Yuan is just like an angel. She is the not only beautiful, but is also this year's strongest disciple of Jade Lady Subschool. I heard that it has already been decided that she is going to be the leader of the disciples at Jade Lady Mountain Peak, and will also become the senior of the Mountain Peak someday. No wonder. It's really extraordinary how Jade Lady Subschool accepts only female disciples and turns them into such strong masters. Shengguan Shuani, Yin Qiliang and Zhangsun Yuan are this year's strongest among all of us, and no one even knows what their true strengths are. I have heard from some people that the three of them are already at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, or may even have reached the Xiantian 4th stage. When the disciples standing in the surrounding heard this, they could help but hold their breaths. Peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, or Xiantian 4th stage. To them, masters of such strengths were simply godlike existences. Chapter 92. See you later. Hua Menghan. Perhaps this level of strength was not too conspicuous in the main sect, but for many subschools, it was already very scary. All of these disciples were undoubtedly very talented, and after entering into the main sect, they would start to cultivate vigorously. In the future, they would most likely enter into the Zhendao realm and become true disciples. Peak of Xiantian 3rd stage? Yi Shiwen turned again to look at the three strongest disciples, and noticed that they were probably only a step away from reaching the Xiantian 4th stage, and right now, he was not a match for any of them. But Yi Shiwen was not worried about these three geniuses, because he was confident that he would eventually be able to catch up with them. Junior sister apprentice, take a look, these are this year's disciples. Yi Ziwen's eyes were closed when suddenly a loud voice reached his ears. Accompanied with the sound of flapping wings, 2 demon birds flew down from the sky. On top of a large eagle stood a man with an appearance of about 27-year-old, clad in traditional Chinese clothes dancing in the wind, and there was a smile on his face. The other bird was Snow White Crane, carrying a black-clothed beautiful woman, who had a pair of black curved eyebrows and pure white skin. Looking at her, it seemed as if a celestial beauty had just descended into the mortal world. Everyone's eyes were attracted to both of them. Even Yi Shiwen was no exception, but his eyes were not on the man but on the woman atop the crane. Hua Menghan. Yi Shiwen was determined that this was definitely the girl he had rescued in the cave. Compared to the slightly awkward girl he had seen last time, this time when he saw Hua Menghan, she was really like a fairy having an unparalleled grace and elegance. Her appearance was truly pleasing to the eyes. Hua Menghan seemed to have noticed Yi Ziwen's gaze, and turned to look at him. After seeing Yi Shiwen, Hua Menghan was somewhat surprised as she did not expect to meet him so soon. Moreover, his current strength had really surprised her because when the last time she had met him, he was only a Hotian realm master. Although while rescuing her, he had beheaded Luo Tian, but at that time, she had seriously injured Luo Tian. But now, Yi Shiwen had not just broken through to the Xiantian realm, and was already at the peak of Xiantian 1st stage. Hua Menghan slowly descended from her crane, and step by step, walked towards Yi Shiwen while simply ignoring the Chinese-robed youth, who was constantly trying to talk to her. You came. Hua Menghan said. Yi Shiwen nodded. I still haven't thanked you for the last time. Hua Menghan said as she was in a hurry last time, and had left without thanking him personally, which could be considered a very rude behavior. It doesn't matter. That was as easy as lifting a hand. Yi Shiwen shook his head, and said as he had benefited a lot from that incident, and couldn't ask for more. Junior sister apprentice. At this time the Chinese-robed youth also came over. Who are you? The Chinese-robed youth frowned and shouted in a low tone. He had instinctively felt some threat from Yi Shiwen. Seeing the youth questioning Yi Shiwen, Hua Menghan wrinkled her black eyebrow. But right then Yi Shiwen said, Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen could see arrogance and a look of disdain in the eyes of that Chinese-robed youth. The main sect disciples always looked down on the disciples from sub-schools, as there was a huge difference between their strengths. But that Chinese-robed youth forced a smile on his face and said, Hello junior disciple. I'm Hu Yanghang, a core disciple. When Yi Shiwen heard that Hu Yanghang was a core disciple, adding to his arrogant tone, the meaning was clear that he was obviously pursuing Hua Menghan, and was one of her suitors. And this was a method of warning him to stay away. Just like Hua Menghan, Yi Shiwen also neglected Hu Yanghang. He took out a phoenix-shaped jade pendant, then put it before Hua Menghan and said, I give this jade rare treasure back to you. There was a shocked look in Hu Yanghang's eyes, and his gaze was continuously swinging between Hua Menghan and Yi Shiwen. How could he not know that this jade pendant was very precious to Hua Menghan, and she would never allow others to even take a look at it? And now, it actually appeared in the hands of Yi Shiwen. Exactly what had happened between the two of them, that Hua Menghan had actually given her precious jade pendant to someone else. Thinking of all sorts of possibilities, suddenly, Hu Yanghang looked at Yi Shiwen with a killing look flashing in his eyes. Since you already have it, just keep it, Hua Menghan lightly said. In comparison to what you did for me, this jade pendant is simply not enough. When many disciples standing around in the crowd have heard Hua Menghan, they could secretly make a guess that Yi Shiwen must have handled some major matter that had actually led to his friendship with this fairy. Yi Shiwen did not want to explain anything to anyone, as this secret belonged to the two of them, and he wanted to keep this thing a secret between just the two of them. Assessment is about to start. I won't take your time anymore. After saying a few words to Yi Shiwen, she didn't stay there for too long and flew into the sky on her crane and soon disappeared from the eyes of everyone. When Hu Yanghang saw Hua Menghan leaving, he was also not in a mood to stay there. He first gave gloomy glances to Yi Shiwen, then mounted his eagle and left. After the two of them left, many disciples of various sub-schools started to give curious looks to Yi Shiwen, because they didn't know how he had come to know a disciple from Full Moon Peak. Even Shangguan Xuani, Yan Qiliang and Zhang Sun Yuan had turned back, and were looking curiously at Yi Shiwen. Although they did not have to be specific, but anyone could make a guess that those two were definitely the disciples of Full Moon Peak, because except the true disciples and elder class people, as well as some characters with special permissions, only the disciples of this peak were allowed to fly over the Full Moon Peak. The people of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were especially very curious. They couldn't understand how Hua Menghan was on such friendly terms with Yi Shiwen, and it seemed that she owed him a great debt as well. Otherwise, why would she be willing to give her personal jade pendant to him? Although they did not know the specific effects of that jade pendant, but with just one look, anyone could see that the jade pendant was really extraordinary. Faced with so many curious gazes, Yi Shiwen directly closed his eyes. Yi Shiwen had killed Luo Tian and people of his clan, so he didn't want to get in trouble by getting a new formidable enemy. Yi Shiwen also did not want to develop a habit of stirring up trouble wherever he goes. The crowd did not continue to look at Yi Shiwen, because assessment examination had finally started. Chapter 93. Wanmo's surprise attack. The assessment examination had finally begun, and this was going to be a turning point in their lives. Yi Shiwen also did not have many thoughts about Hua Menghan, because at the moment, one could say that he was still very far away from her. A purple-clothed old man flew from a distant place and arrived in front of the disciples. He was an elder of Full Moon Peak, and without any idle talk, He just looked at the crowd then said, "This entry assessment examination begins." The purple-clothed elder conveniently waved his hand and suddenly, the space began to violently fluctuate. A mysterious streak of light appeared out of nowhere, and it seemed that the whole space had been ripped open, and a gate formed which slowly opened with a loud rumble. Suddenly a large amount of lingqi, mixed with disgusting gas, spewed out from the gate. Fortunately, the Hotian realm disciples had not yet opened up the world bridge, and so they couldn't feel the sudden discharge of lingqi from the gate. However, those Xiantian realm disciples suddenly felt the presence of this disgusting gas, and frowned with a clear displeasure on their faces. However, it was not surprising for everyone because they had already been informed by their elders that there were large number of Huanma devils present in the Huanma territory. So of course, there would be a large amount of magic present in the atmosphere. In fact, so far, it was found that only devil race could biologically adapt to Machi. Even the most violent and powerful demon beasts couldn't withstand the direct instill of Machi. However, Yi Zaiwen's eyes had brightened when he discovered that the special space in his mind was able to absorb the Machi. He already knew that he could absorb the lingqi present in the atmosphere in the mysterious space, but had never done it before because the absorption effectiveness of lingqi from the atmosphere was too slow. Even in the lingqi-enriched environment of Yiyuan School, the absorption rate of lingqi was very less compared to that of the lingqi present in the spirit stones. After all, formation of these spirit stones would take innumerable years of absorption of lingqi, so it was natural that it would be easy to extract lingqi from spirit stones. Yi Xuan thought, since he could absorb the machi in the special space, then he might also be able to absorb yaoqi, or other energy forms of qi as well. But Yi Xuan didn't have enough time to think of this matter, as the sub-school teams had started entering the Huanma territory one by one according to their ranks. The team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School also walked towards the entrance of Huanma territory. The purple-clothed elder waved his hand, and a huge bubble formed, and they were wrapped inside it, and the team quickly disappeared from the eyes of the crowd. No one knew after how long. The team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School finally appeared in the Huanma territory, and everywhere they could see a devastated scenery. The ground was withered and from time to time, magical fire was coming out of the fissures in the ground, and the air containing the mixture of lingqi and machi was blowing on their faces. The environment here was quite harsh, and originally, this territory belonged to the devil race which was once destroyed, and they had already left. Not to mention those Huanma devils were the remaining part of the lost devil civilization. It was similar to situation where a modern man would leave the city to live in the forest for decades. Is this Huanma territory? It is even more desolate than expected. One of the disciples sighed and said, "Yes." Zhang Yang nodded. "It seems like the random transportation like the last time, and without a map, we do not even know our location. There's no need to hurry. Once we find a Huanma city, we will naturally get a map from there." Yi Feng said, as in the Huanma territory, Huanma race should be considered the indigenous, and it was not surprising if they had a map. Moreover, Huanma belonged to the devil race, but they certainly were intelligent creatures. Therefore they also had small towns in the Huanma territory, but these towns were simply just a prototype and couldn't be regarded as real towns. Suddenly the air distorted, and the surrounding scenery instantly changed, and in a flash, numerous tall buildings and a bustling metropolis took shape in front of Yi Xuan. Yi Xuan suddenly felt nostalgic about this scenery. For a long time he had not seen such scenery, which used to be so common for him. That very common scenery containing the reinforced concrete buildings of the city, but at this moment, seemed so friendly. This scene was buried deep inside his heart, but he did not know when it would disappear. Yi Xuan suddenly sneered and punched forward, containing the terrifying might of a tornado, which swept clean the scene instantly. At this time, the nostalgic scene disappeared and returned back into the scene of Huanma territory. As he had expected, this was really the illusion magic, although he was well prepared before coming as Lin Zhantian, had reminded everyone to be attentive in the Huanma territory. Huanma excelled at using illusion magic to confuse people, and once someone fell into the trap, he will be quickly defeated or even eaten. Sure enough, When Yi Shiwen opened his eyes, he saw hundreds of Huanma heading towards them. Their bodies were very small, only 2 feet tall. For arms and the size of their head was almost more than their whole body. 2 huge red eyes were flickering with ominous rays of light, and their big bloody mouths were open, and were rushing towards the team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. A Huanma had already rushed to the front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered and shot his palm, producing a thunderstorm rumbling sound, pass like thunder and move like the wind, and his palm directly shot into the big mouth of the Huanma. Boom! The Hotian 9th stage Huanma immediately exploded in a single blow. Almost in a flash, half of the body of that Huanma turned into Machi. The bodies of these Huanma devils were mostly made up of energy, coupled with the unusually large brain, which they specially used to send out illusion magic with ease. In an instant, the Machi that passed through the body of Yi Shiwen was absorbed by the mysterious space and deepened his comprehension of various martial arts. In fact, Yi Zaiwen's martial arts practice never stopped in the special space, but when he fully immersed himself in practicing, then the efficiency also increased. And after absorbing the Machi from the dead Huanma, he realized that the comprehension speed in the mysterious space was a little faster compared to when he absorbed the Lingqi from spirit stones. But at this time, he didn't have much time to think. He instantly drew his long blade and chopped out a brilliant bladiki in the shape of several meters long bladiki, which instantly arrived in front of several Huanma, and they were split in half. At this time, Yi Feng, Zhang Yang and Yi Ruxue, the other 3 Xiantian masters, also shattered their illusions and rushed towards the attacking Huanma. After a while, the other disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School also shattered their respective illusions and joined the fight. Chapter 94. Masters intercept. Yi Shiwen heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that Huanma itself was not a strong creature, but the problem was their raid. They would first release an illusion magic, and people would unknowingly fall into the illusion. Although most of the experts had firm minds and wouldn't take long to break out of the illusion, but even if they took a couple of seconds to break out, these 2 seconds would often decide their fate, because for ordinary people, 2 seconds were nothing. But that was not the case for a warrior facing Huanma raid. Sure enough, Yi Shiwen had not expected, but the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain disciples would so easily escape from Huanma's illusion. Even if the numbers of Huanma were 5 times more than their own, under the leadership of Yi Shiwen and the others, killing those Huanma had become child's play for the team. Everyone easily killed 1 or more Huanma, and completed the assessment without any fundamental difficulty. But, even after quickly slaughtering these Huanma, they were not relaxed, because clearance was not their main goal. Clearing the assessment was easy, unless someone had a severe bad luck. Passing with extraordinary scores was their actual goal. Anyway, this test had a full month's time, and everyone had plenty of time to hone their skills, but also kill more Huanma for better performance. Everyone knew that their actions inside the Huanma territory were being observed by high-level school personnel, so they just needed to give a good performance to catch their attention. Now that we are inside the Huanma territory, we may encounter danger at any time, and those Huanma may appear anywhere, so we have to be careful at all time. Yi Feng said. Yes, the disciples said in unison. Before coming here, the goal for these disciples was to pass the assessment, and then only they would think about getting good results. But since Yi Shiwen was with them, their morale had increased. In their hearts, Yi Shiwen had completely replaced Yi Feng. Although Yi Shiwen was younger in age, but to them, he was just like their spiritual leader. Yi Zaiwen's strength was still not comparable to that of Shengguan Shuani, but his strength was still among the group of disciples with their strengths, right below the 3 strongest disciples. And being led by such a strong master was very assuring for them, as anyway they won't die in the Huanma territory. However, Yi Feng was keeping silent, and was not talking much after coming to the Huanma territory, because he was little anxious as Huanma were not their only opponents. Even excluding the 3 major sub-schools, there still were a lot of strong sub-schools with many Xiantian masters. These Xiantian masters from various sub-schools had come from all over the Great Yu State to enter into Yiyuan School, and possessed different kinds of martial arts, and unknown killing techniques and skills. So far, they had not yet encountered another team, but sooner or later, they might encounter a very formidable opponent. Although they won't die in the Huanma territory, but they would still be thrown outside after dying. Days passed, and shortly, the Qingfeng Mountain crowd had spent more than 3 days in the Huanma territory. In 3 days, they faced Huanma raids several times, but the crowd had already become experienced in fighting off the Huanma, and had at least beheaded 56 Huanma. And with that, they had extraordinarily completed the assessment. Wu Hao and Qian Wanru were on the verge of having a breakthrough, and it seemed that they might have it in the Huanma territory. It was a good thing for them that they were going to enter into the Xiantian realm before joining the main sect. On this day, they approached a mountain and were thinking about exploring it when suddenly 7 figures jumped out and intercepted them. They were in every respect releasing an extremely terrifying aura and were definitely very powerful Xiantian masters. The complexion of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool suddenly changed. 7 powerful Xiantian masters had actually come out of nowhere and intercepted them. One must know that even a moderate-rank subschool had less than 7 Xiantian masters, and Qingfeng Mountain Subschool had only 4. And each of these 7 Xiantian masters had a strong Xiantian aura, and the weakest of them was at least the master of Xiantian second stage, which had totally startled them. "Who are you people? Why are you blocking our way?" Yi Xuan came forward and asked. He had noticed 3 of these 7 masters in the plaza. He was paying attention to the strong masters in the plaza, and had made a mental note of the top players from various subschools. He knew that these people were one of the strongest Xiantian masters of this year, but he had not seen the other 4 masters, and it was possible that they didn't belong to any subschools and were definitely newcomers. After all, Yiyuan School was one of the 4 great sects, and held a huge influence in the Great Yu Stat. So during the triennial examination, the aspiring disciples were not only from the respective subschools, but from all parts of the state. Various powerful clans from all over the Great Yu State would also send their elite disciples to join the main sect and bring glory to their clans. Although the number of disciples who had entered the Huanma territory to participate in the assessment exam was very large, but Huanma territory was very huge, much larger compared to Blood Yuan territory, and therefore, they had not encountered other disciples for these many days. But as the days would pass, the number of encounters would continue to grow more and more. These people were not very old, and seemed around the age of 20, but all of them had a dignified appearance, and presumably were top masters in the younger generation of their clans. "You are Yi Xuan?" The Chinese-robed young man, who was standing in the middle, and seemed like the leader of these 7 masters, asked. All the subschool disciples had heard about the recent exploits of Yi Xuan, because the rumors had made him quite famous among the disciples as the undefeated subschool disciple. The disciples from other schools or clans, who didn't belong to any subschools, were generally very talented. After all, they were not stupid. If they tried to enter into the main sect with poor strength, then they would only become handyman disciples. That is the reason why only strong masters of Xiantian realm would come to join the Yiyuan school's main sect. Yi Zaiwen's heart sank when he heard that they had actually come for him. He looked towards the Chinese-robed man and replied, "It's me, what do you want?" Chapter 95. Your family members are bugs. It's me, what do you want? Yi Xuan looked at the 7 people, and almost all of them looked dignified, and seemed like the elite disciples from their respective clans or schools. But this time, they had actually come to join the main sect. "Your journey ends here," the Chinese-robed young man coldly said. "You should know that you must never offend people you can't resist." Among these 7 people, not even one of them had a lower cultivation than Yi Xuan. All of them had a terrifying presence, not to mention, they had come together for him, so it was going to get rough. The 4 of them standing on the sides were amazingly at the peak of Xiantian second stage, with 40% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. The 3 in the middle were at the Xiantian third stage with 50% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Chinese-robed young man standing in the middle had an amazing aura, and was staring coldly at Yi Xuan, as if he was looking at a bug. On his left was a diminutive young youth with a sinister look on his face, and his expression resembled that of a poisonous snake. On his right was an extremely seductive woman dressed in purple Chinese dress, exposing her nice figure. But there was a cold expression on her face. Yi Shiwen noticed that this trio would prove to be very tough opponents for him, and it would be very difficult to deal with any of them. He needed to be very careful while fighting them. He could easily take on each of these 7 masters in a one-on-one battle, and Huanma territory was best for battles like this. But right now, the situation was a little perilous for him, because all 7 of them had come together for his life, and he didn't even know how he had offended them, or exactly whom he had offended. In the end, he might not have enough energy left to fight all of them. How can there be so many strong Xiantian masters? Yi Feng's heart sunk down, because he was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, and except Yi Shiwen, no one else in the team was more powerful than him. Because of this, he could clearly feel the terrifying aura of these 7 masters, and knew that they very strong. It's scary, Yi Rushua muttered. Yi Shiwen, you will die today without even getting a chance to fight back. That senior said to teach you a lesson to make you understand your own status, so that you know whom you should get close to, and with whom you should not. The diminutive youth licked his lips, and a killing intent flashed in his eyes. Hu Yanghang, in Yi Ziwen's mind, that name immediately cropped up. That diminutive youth had already given him enough hints that it was easy to guess the enemy's identity. This Hu Yanghang was really very insidious and ruthless. Just to make him understand to not get close to Hua Menghan, he had planned all this to teach him a lesson in Huanma territory. Yi Shiwen's heart was filled with anger and hatred for that arrogant bastard, who thought he was superior to others and couldn't mind his own damn business. Let me teach him a lesson. A blue-robed youth came forward and said, "We are not your enemies, but you still must intercept us. This is really going too far." Qian Wanru said with indignation, "You all leave right now." Yi Shiwen suddenly said, "How can we just go and leave you alone?" Yi Rushua said in a worried tone, "These people are the top players, and even if you stay, you won't be of much help." Yi Shiwen said like a true leader, because he knew that sometimes quantity could not make up for strength. Except Yi Shiwen, the strongest among them was Yi Feng, who was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, and most of other disciples were still the masters of the Hotian realm. If they stayed, it would be totally meaningless to fight a hopeless battle, so they might as well leave in advance. "Hey, you are quite knowledgeable." The diminutive young people sneered, and since their main goal was just Yi Shiwen, they didn't care about other weaklings. Everyone thought the same, because that was the truth. Under the siege of so many strong Xiantian masters, their presence would only prove to be an obstacle for Yi Shiwen. Qingfeng mountain people quickly made their decisions, and so did Yi Shiwen, and most importantly, in the Huanma territory, even if someone died inside, they would immediately be thrown outside. So it was not that Yi Shiwen was really in a life-threatening danger. After thinking a lot and making their decisions soon, the Qingfeng mountain crowd left, leaving only Yi Shiwen and the 7 masters on the scene. Yi Shiwen was relieved, because now he could display his full strength and go all out without caring about anything. "Good, those bugs are gone. Hey, it seems that you are quite famous among the disciples of your sub-school." The blue-robed youth sneered and said, "Bugs." A killing intent flashed in Yi Ziwen's eyes. The blue-robed youth took a step, and like a tornado, he rushed towards Yi Shiwen, with his fist forming a huge storm, and a terrifying twisting Quanjin suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered and shot his palm, rushing thunder hand, pass like thunder and move like the wind, and with the rumbling sound of thunder, his palm wrapped in lightning like Jinqi instantly greeted the coming fist. Boom! The collision produced a loud sound accompanied with layer by layer of shockwaves rushing in all directions, as if the mighty waves were running on the surface of the sea. These waves became a huge twisting storm and swept off the scene. The fights between Xiantian and Hotian realm masters would always be on entirely different levels, because Xiantian masters could directly stimulate the Lingqi fluctuations in the atmosphere, making these fights highly destructive. Yi Ziwen's terrifying palm attack had easily blocked off and wiped out the storm created by the blue-robed youth's attack. There was a surprised look on his face, as he did not expect his attack to be effortlessly blocked off by Yi Shiwen. Bugs, Yi Shiwen sneered. Your family members are bugs. Yi Shiwen instantly rushed towards him, as if a celestial being was talking a stroll, and with a group of thundercloud like Zhen Qi covering his right hand, he shoved it towards the body of that blue-robed youth. He didn't even have a chance to react. The three powerful masters suddenly shouted, "Stop! You dare! Stop!" Yi Shiwen didn't care about these people, and instantly shot his palm. Boom! The thunder like Zhen Qi blasted into the chest that blue-robed youth, and instantly blasted him away. He was sent flying into the sky, but suddenly his stature turned into a streamer, and directly disappeared. Chapter 96, Arduous Battle. Boom! The thunder like Zhen Qi blasted into the chest that blue-robed youth, and instantly blasted him away. He was sent flying into the sky, but suddenly his stature turned into a streamer, and directly disappeared. He died in Huanma territory, but he didn't really die, but disappeared into a streamer, and was thrown back into the outside world. How dare you? The remaining 6 people were looking at Yi Shiwen, with a look of disbelief on their faces. They just couldn't digest the fact that Yi Shiwen had actually killed their comrade in a blink of an eye. They just never thought that things would turn out like this. They were overconfident and looking at their strengths. This assessment was going to be very easy for them. When they were given the task to ambush Yi Shiwen and teach him a lesson, they had considered this task a child's play. After all, he was just one guy and his strength was also below their own. They had imagined that he would be crushed to death in a single blow from that blue-robed youth. But what just happened? Yi Shiwen sneered and said, "One bug crushed and now it's your turn. Will you all come together, or one by one?" Yi Shiwen took a deep breath, relaxed his whole body, concentrated. He must fight because he had no chance of retreat. His only option was to go all out, not to mention that he wouldn't die here. So this was a good opportunity to fight so many powerful masters and gain experience. Since this was an examination, and these rivals could be called his enemies, so he could only continue to conquer his enemies one by one, and then only he would be able to become invincible. Yi Shiwen even had a crazy idea to use the extraordinary strengths of these 6 men and force his inner state to its limits. Then he might be able to have a breakthrough, because it was said that a breakthrough could be initiated during a life and death situation by forcing oneself to the extreme. You are courting death. Arrogant. These masters were suddenly outraged as whether they belonged to sub-schools or other outer forces coming from all over the state. But there was no doubt that all of them were top talents from their respective forces and had never been insulted like this. Not to mention, they had come to crush him. But now, one of them had been crushed instead, and he had dared to insult them as well. Yi Ziwen's provocation had hurt their pride and dignity, and this unexpected humiliation had caused their anger to suddenly erupt. Kill him! All 6 of them shouted and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Being the outstanding disciples in their forces, each of them possessed one or more secret Xiantian power techniques, practiced to the profound level. At this time, various types of martial arts blasted towards Yi Shiwen. He finally pulled out a long blade from the scabbard on his back and waved it violently, which instantly shot a dazzling blade light towards the incoming rumbling attacks. Boom! A heart-shaking loud sound burst out, sending shockwaves in all directions, causing the smoke and dust to spread in surrounding area. Yi Ziwen's body was fully wrapped in Xiantian Jinqi body, and he leaped up towards the sky. And instead of retreating back, he used Celestial Step, and in a flash, his figure rushed horizontally all the way towards the 6 masters with his long blade scattering a bright blade light. A master didn't get a chance to evade the blade attack, and was split in half, and disappeared in the very next instant. This was indeed a terrifying battle where the fight had begun only an instant ago, and a master had already been beheaded. The remaining 5 didn't have a shred of mercy, and severely attacked Yi Shiwen. Even if he was using celestial steps, he had been hit several times and many wounds appeared on his body. Yi Shiwen, you are strong. I admit that you are very strong, but unfortunately you are facing so many of us, and you no chance of winning. Just surrender, because anyway no one really dies in this Huanma territory. The Chinese robed young man said. He was a prideful person, but he had to admit that Yi Shiwen was ridiculously strong, because even if they were ganging up on one individual, but they were still having a hard time coping with him. There was clearly a look of disdain on their faces, because two of their own had been effortlessly defeated by the guy they had initially looked down upon. But he was still giving them a hard time in this brutal fight, so they had to admit that Yi Shiwen was truly formidable. Yi Shiwen sneered but didn't answer. He was bathed in blood, but the wounds couldn't make him to withdraw, but only made him to have a clear understanding that although no one would die in the Huanma territory, but they would still get mentally and physically injured. In the world of martial arts, there was no retreat. Giving up was never an option, and the most important practice was to persevere, or else all previous efforts would come to naught. Yi Shiwen was not planning to give up just because he had sustained injuries. This time, he strengthened his determination with the thought that this was an illusion, so he must persevere to break out of it. Phew! A subtle piercing sound echoed in out of the blue. It seemed as if a dagger had arrived to the front of Yi Shiwen, but it was actually that diminutive youth. He was extremely fast, and had practiced a strange agility technique, because his movements were similar to that of snakes, which could easily scare people. But suddenly, the Chinese-robed youth appeared in front of Yi Shiwen, and blasted his punch, releasing a golden Quanjin. It seemed as if a golden light had illuminated the entire world, but the atmosphere had been distorted by the burst of this golden Quanjin. A cold light flashed in Yi Ziwen's eyes, and the spirit stone started to burn, producing an unimaginable amount of lingqi, which was directly injected into the special space. A large influx of martial arts experience entered into his mind, and it would be no exaggeration to say that he was trying his best to surpass his own limits. When fighting against 5 strong Xiantian masters, most people would have already lost confidence by now, and talking about most people, there was simply no chance for them to grab the victory in a situation like this. But Yi Shiwen refused to give up on the slightest hope of victory. These series of attacks were extremely dangerous. No need to say that Chinese-robed youth was the most terrifying opponent. The charming woman had a hand mirror, and she was using it to constantly send out waves of intermittent divine streaks of light, and wherever the light would shine, the space would immediately distort. The might of her attack was abnormally terrifying. This was the biggest crisis Yi Shiwen had ever come across. A crazed look flashed in Yi Ziwen's eyes. The long blade incessantly danced in his hand, and instantly 9 blade shadows appeared in the sky. Boom! The Quanjin of that Chinese-robed youth bombed fiercely on Yi Ziwen's body. He spat a mouthful of blood, and his black hair flew upwards, but his body was like an iron wall that didn't budge at all. Instead, he continued to swing his long blade, with all of his focus centered on the diminutive youth. Boom! Chapter 97, Breakthrough. Xiantian second stage. Regardless of where that diminutive youth was trying to flee, he was still unable to escape from the blade curtain of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had reached a high degree of proficiency in using the move, New Moon Beheader, and the curtain of 9 blades had instantly blocked all the movements of that diminutive youth. He had been completely surrounded by this curtain of blades, and had been unable to utilize his agility skill. Poochie! The diminutive youth just stood there, as if he had already given up, and let Yi Shiwen to behead him. It was not that he didn't want to do anything, but he couldn't. Regardless of where he wanted to escape, Yi Ziwen's blade would easily catch up to him. At last, he was directly beheaded by Yi Shiwen and disappeared. The remaining 4 masters were furious because in a short time, Yi Shiwen had unexpectedly beheaded 3 of their comrades, especially the diminutive youth, as he was one of the 3 strongest masters in their group, and had been slaughtered so easily. "You are courting death," the charming woman shouted loudly, and violently shook the hand mirror in her hand. The divine rays of light rumbled, and went directly towards Yi Shiwen. Bang! 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 Intermittent terrifying explosions occurred when Yi Shiwen tried to block the divine light with his palm, but as the divine light fell on his palm, it started to directly disintegrate his iron-like palm, which was immediately covered in blood. In his body, the mad revolution of Zhen Qi was going on. Breakthrough. He just needed to have a breakthrough, because that was the only way out of this situation. If he didn't have a breakthrough, then facing the deadly attacks of these masters would only lead to his end. Although he had beheaded the diminutive youth, but at the same time, he had also suffered the golden fist attack from the Chinese robed youth, and the injury he had sustained was getting more and more serious. Yi Shiwen didn't run away, and was betting everything on the breakthrough. He needed to have it during the battle, because he had no other choice left, and if he couldn't succeed in having a breakthrough soon, then it would most likely be a dead end for him. Yi Shiwen roared loudly while the Zhen Qi was rushing madly inside his body, layer upon layer, like waves of the sea. His black hair was dispersed and flying in the wind, and his whole body was covered in severe wounds and blood. If looked from afar, he seemed like a reincarnation of a mad god of killing from ancient times, who had returned to wreak havoc on this world. Yi Ziwen's eyes were somewhat vacant, as he was unceasingly processing innumerable information in his mind, while the Zhen Qi was madly revolving inside his body. He seemed like a puppet resisting the attacks of those four masters, with only a small section of consciousness left to operate the body, while his main consciousness was completely immersed in the desperately trying to break through his inner state. Also, he was able to do it because he was accustomed to this. But before, he would keep his main spirit on the outside, and now, he was focusing his main spirit into the bang. Yi Shiwen was blasted away and sent flying again. The muscles on his chest darted off in all directions along with a lot of blood. Ha ha ha, he is still refusing to die. The Chinese robed youth laughed and said. The remaining three masters were finally relieved. After all, it was too hard to deal with a formidable master like Yi Shiwen. 7 masters had ganged up on him, but he had still been able to kill 3 of them in a short time. It clearly showed that none of them were his opponents in a one-on-one battle. Fortunately, they had pushed him to a dead end, and could finally behead him. Suddenly they discovered that the present Yi Shiwen had somewhat changed, and right then, a majestic aura shot up into the sky. The bright look had instantly restored in his eyes, but his aura continued to rise, and quickly rose to a pinnacle state. However, his aura didn't actually stop to rise, but bit by bit, it continued to rise further towards a breakthrough. Stop him, hurry up and stop him, do not let him have a breakthrough. The charming woman suddenly shouted in a sharp voice. She was also a Xiantian master, so how could she not know what was happening? She immediately understood that Yi Shiwen was on the verge of a breakthrough, and could have it any time. He was originally so hard to deal with, and if allowed to have a breakthrough, then won't they all lose their lives at his hands? However, it was already too late, as his aura had finally broken through the barrier, and he had finally reached the Xiantian second stage, with a 60% transformed Xiantian Zhen Qi in his body. After breaking through to the Xiantian second stage, now, he could easily contend with masters at the rank of Shangguan Xuani, let alone these 4 masters. Yi Shiwen looked calm, and collected, then coldly looked at the 4 masters. The Chinese robed youth immediately rushed towards him, aiming a golden tornado like Quan Jin right at him. Yi Shiwen sneered and shot coiling dragon palm. Suddenly a roaring gigantic dragon rose from the abyss, and soared high in the sky. This was the scene of coiling dragon palm. And this was also the first time he had used this ancient technique in an actual combat. A long big dragon congealed from the palm of Yi Shiwen, and roared loudly. It flew straight towards that golden tornado, opened its big powerful claws and directly grasped it. The golden tornado had been immediately neutralized by that dragon, and it went straight towards the Chinese robed youth, and maliciously collided with his body. Puff! The Chinese robed youth spat a mouthful of blood, and his body flew upside down halfway. He changed into streamer and vanished. At this time, the charming woman's divine light had approached in front of Yi Shiwen, and was about to attack his body. But suddenly, his long blade flashed and instantly chopped out a terrifying bladiki. The divine light collided head-on with the bladiki, and was directly annihilated. But after that, the bladiki didn't stop and directly rushed towards the charming woman. She never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually be so incredibly strong that he would completely annihilate her divine light attack. But she didn't have any time to dodge, and was directly split in half. The remaining 2 masters couldn't believe their eyes, and were looking incredibly at Yi Shiwen. They couldn't understand that the tables had been turned, and the situation had suddenly become dangerous for them. A while ago, they had an upper hand. However, in a short time, the situation had reversed and Yi Shiwen had got on the winning side after killing the Chinese-robed youth and the charming woman. They just couldn't accept such a reversal of situation. However, the three strongest masters had been killed by Yi Shiwen, so it was obvious that they did not have the means to escape his wrath. They tried to run away, but were chased down and quickly beheaded by Yi Shiwen. Soon, the seven masters reappeared in the full moon peak with unsightly complexions. They never thought that even if so many masters would encircle together to kill one person, but they would be killed instead. Before, they also thought that it was such a pity that they wouldn't be able to actually kill Yi Shiwen in the Huanma territory, a place where no one died. But right now, they were actually very happy that luckily, it was not the reality, otherwise they would be dead right now. They had clearly seen the ruthless nature of Yi Shiwen, and knew very well that even if it was the reality, Yi Shiwen definitely would not have shown any mercy. Instead, he would have killed them even more ruthlessly. Chapter 98. Proceeds to join after almost 1 month later in the Huanma territory. Ha! With a loud shout, Yi Ziwen's figure danced together with his long blade, and directly split a Huanma into 2 halves. The demon beasts of Xiantian first stage were simply not a match for him, and his blade would easily split them in half. After beheading the Huanma devils, half of their bodies would turn into machi, and he would absorb this machi into the mysterious space. Thanks to this, his understanding of various martial arts techniques had increased considerably. 1 month ago, even killing a Huanma of peak Xiantian third stage was very difficult for him. But now, it had become a child's play for him. 5 days ago, he had fought with a Huanma of Xiantian fourth stage, and his fighting strength was so fierce that it had to escape with severe injuries. Although the battle efficiency of Huanma was somewhat low, but it was sufficient enough to let him assess his own strength. Now, his strength was easily equivalent to that of masters of peak Xiantian third stage with 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi, and he could even contend with masters of Xiantian fourth stage with 70% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. During this month, Yi Shiwen was not in a hurry to meet up with the crowd of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, and had fully concentrated on testing his new strength and honing his skills. And for that, these Huanma devils had become his test subjects. In just a month's practice, his various martial arts had made considerable progress. The technique to show the most progress was restraining breath technique, and he had practiced it to the Desheng realm. At present, he could change his own appearance and breath at will without getting recognized. The Xiantian realm parts of celestial step had also been practiced to the Xiaoqing realm. Now his speed had increased considerably, and his movements had become even more elegant than before. The last move, full moon beheader of the technique, cold moon beheader, had also been practiced to the Xiaoqing realm. The coiling dragon palm first move, hidden dragon rises from the abyss, had been practiced to the Xiaoqing realm, and its might had increased by several times. Yi Shiwen could contend with the masters of Xiantian fourth stage by relying on the terrifying might of hidden dragon rises from the abyss, but using this move once consumed about 10% of his Jinqi, and though he possessed 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi, but using this move multiple times could put a lot of pressure on his body. All these days, Yi Shiwen had spent most of his time and energy in deducing the second layer contents of Tyrant Body Technique, and his hard work had paid off, because after spending a total of 1,000 spirit stones, he had finally deduced the second layer, and gained the first glimpse of the next layer, and his strength had doubled once again. Now, his previous strength of 19 dragons had directly increased to the strength of 39 dragons, which was the combined result of Tyrant Body Technique, and reaching the peak of 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Fortunately, only 1,000 spirit stones had been burned to deduce the second layer of Tyrant Body Technique, and he now had 2,000 spirit stones left in his stock, which was still enough to call him wealthy. The main reason behind this was the machi released by dead Huanma. Yi Shiwen would absorb this machi, and this had satisfied the enormous need of energy needed to practice in special space, and this was how he didn't have to use many spirit stones. This was also the reason why he was not in a hurry to meet up with the people of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, but was wandering alone in the Huanma boundary, fighting and killing Huanma. He didn't want to expose to others that he could absorb Machi, as this matter was directly related to the special space. Special space could be compared to a giant bulldozer. An expert needed to walk on a rough road with many obstacles to reach his goal, and the job of this space was to flatten the road and make it easier for the expert to walk on it. So what if it looked like a dishonest method, if one could become stronger by using it? Yi Shiwen calculated the time and found out that it was almost time to exit the Huanma territory. The 1-month time of assessment examination was going to end, and during this month, he couldn't calculate how many Huanma he had killed. However, he didn't care about that because his biggest harvest this time was breaking through to the Xiantian second stage, making it a worthwhile trip. Now it was time to go and join the group of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. All these days, he was being very careful and stayed away from trouble. After all, he had enemies in Huanma territory. Forget about Bingdao Sub-School. Even that Hu Yanghang had sent 7 powerful masters after him, although they had been completely slaughtered by him. Right now, it was obvious that after sending so many formidable masters, Hu Yanghang must be hoping that Yi Shiwen would be easily taken care of. But once he would receive the news that they had been defeated and thrown out of the Huanma territory, he would definitely become very furious. After all, Yi Shiwen had single-handedly crushed a team of 7 top players. If he again encountered those 7 masters, he wouldn't need to struggle against them for so long. He would easily kill them all without breaking a sweat. Even after exiting, if they tried to come looking for trouble, he would certainly finish them off without thinking twice. Yi Shiwen finally decided to go into the direction of Qingfeng Mountain Group he had just located. Although Huanma boundary was very big, but it was still small compared to the Zhenwu Jie world, and passing around messages was not difficult, especially for martial artists. Chapter 99. Desperate struggle. There was an ice-cold expression on the face of that yellow-robed youth with prominent eyebrow bones. Since Sister Zhang Sun is not willing to give up on that treasure, then do not blame me for being stingy. Begin. Shangguan Shuani said in a determined voice. The people of Bingdao Sub-School, as well as some other influential people behind him, suddenly rushed towards the groups of Jade Lady Sub-School and Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. Among these disciples, there were many experts of Xiantian realm, and although the disciples of the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and Jade Lady Sub-School tried to resist, but the opposite party had many people, and they possessed high strength. Bingdao Sub-School was a major sub-school like Jade Lady Sub-School, but it possessed greater strength in comparison. Not to mention, the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were a lot weaker in comparison to the disciples of these major sub-schools, with only 5 Xiantian masters including Qian Wanru and Wu Hao, who had just broken through to the Xiantian realm. Both sides clashed and a fierce battle started. Only after a moment, many disciples from Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and Jade Lady Sub-School had been beheaded and turned into streamer and disappeared. Zhang Sun Yuan and Yi Feng rushed forward to battle with Shangguan Shuani, the purple-robed youth, and that eccentric-looking yellow-robed youth. If Yi Shiwen was here, he would be shocked to find out that in such a short time when he was away from the group of Qingfeng Mountain, Yi Feng had reached the peak of Xiantian third stage, and was not a bit inferior to Shangguan Shuani and other top-ranked masters. Moreover, all of them were strong masters, so it was hard to guess what would be the end result of this large-scale battle. Although Yi Feng and Zhang Sun Yuan were collaborating, but the 3 strong masters of the opposite party were tough, and it was too hard for just the 2 of them to take them. Soon, the 3 masters had started to push Yi Feng and Zhang Sun Yuan in a disadvantageous situation. At this time, an anxious look appeared on the faces of the 2, and the reason was that they had come to realize that their combined fighting strength was inferior to that of the 3 masters, and they would most likely be completely pressed down. They feared that soon, they would be defeated. Shangguan Shuani also wanted to defeat Yi Feng and Zhang Sun Yuan in the shortest possible time, and also save power, because he knew that Yin Qiliang was nearby, and waiting while covetously eyeing them, and would most likely also enter the fray once they were exhausted. They did not want Yin Chiling to take advantage of this conflict, and the best solution to this problem was to beat Yifeng and Zhangsun Yuan as soon as possible in order to be well prepared when Yin Chiling would plan to make his move. The trio had high aspirations for the magical sound flute. The battle among these 5 masters was a spectacular one as all of them were skilled and possessed powerful techniques. Their battle was so fierce that it was sending shock waves throughout the battlefield, and even ground was shaking, which seemed as if their fight was inducing earthquakes. Other disciples were also fighting fiercely, but their battle strength was not at all comparable to that of the 5 masters. In fact, even the shock waves produced from the intense battle of these 5 masters was life-threatening for many disciples, particularly the disciples of Hotian realm. Damn, these disciples of Bingdao Subschool are really shameless. Qian Wanru clenched her teeth and said in an angry voice. She was actually fighting a Xiantian disciple, and being a new Xiantian master, she was having a hard time dealing with him. They actually joined forces with outsiders to bully us. When Qian Wanru said outsiders, she actually meant the disciples who had come from influential clans and didn't belong to any of the sub-schools. They had come to join Yuan School's main sect directly from outside. With respect to the disciples of main sect, the various sub-schools were regarded as branch schools, and they would nurture strong disciples to finally send them to join the main sect. And so compared to the disciples coming from the outer influential forces, the disciples of various sub-schools were treated as seeds, waiting to finally sprout in the main sect. But in general, over the years, during assessment examination, the disciples from the outer influential clans would form their own camp, different from the disciples of various sub-schools. Moreover, although various sub-schools were rivals, but compared with these outsiders, they were comparatively more intimate. That was the reason why Qian Wanru had said that Bingdao Subschool had joined forces with outsiders. However, at this time, regrets and complaints were useless. These disciples did not think that they would get a chance to be a part of an adventure, but in the end it turned into this. And after the news leaked out, it attracted countless people. Kill them all, these bastards have gone too far. Wu Hao roared, and after seeing that there were so many people on the opposite party, perhaps the disciples of these 2 sub-schools would have given up in the real world, but it was a good thing that they were in the Huanma territory and did not fear death. Therefore they would go all out and fight to death, but won't give up so easily. Right, let's kill these bastards who even joined forces with outsiders for their motives. The other disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool roared in unison. The female disciples of Jade Lady Subschool also roared at this time, although they were charming and incomparably beautiful, but were still considered the outstanding disciples of their subschool, and even after arriving in the main sect, the disciples of other subschools had not dared to disrespect them. Suddenly, the morale of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool and Jade Lady Subschool had increased because they had finally realized that the worst-case scenario in this situation was death, and even if they died, they would be thrown outside the Huanma territory and resurrect there. Anyway, they had already cleared the assessment examination, and their main motive was to enter into a good vein, and for that, they needed to display their strengths and potential to the high-level personnel of main sect. So, even if a disciple displayed his talents in the beginning, but due to sudden strike of bad luck, he encountered an extremely powerful Huanma and died, but there was still a chance for him to get selected by some high-level personnel. It could be said that 1 month's time allotted for the assessment examination was almost over, and the exam could also be considered finished, so even if they died now, it won't make much difference. Since you want to die, then I'll give you what you want. The eccentric yellow-robed youth said in a ferocious manner. Obviously, if he decided to massacre the disciples of both Qingfeng Mountain Subschool and Jade Lady Subschool, then who could stop him? The eccentric yellow-robed youth punched out towards Yifeng. He was collaborating with the purple-robed youth to besiege Yifeng. When facing the attacks from 2 strong masters, he immediately fell into a disadvantageous position. Zhang Sun Yuing glanced towards the desperately fighting figure of Yifeng, then clenched her teeth and said, "If you want the magical sound flute, then you will have to step from our corpses to take it." The yellow-robed youth laughed and said, "Then die." His terrifying Zhen Qi suddenly exploded and sent shock waves rippling through the air, which was quite terrifying. Yi Feng resisted against him, but he left an opening, and yellow-robed eccentric youth seized this opportunity to throw a lightning-fast kick towards him. Then suddenly, a terrifying Bladiki descended from the sky and rushed towards the purple-robed youth. Chapter 100. Beheaded in one blade strike. Then suddenly, a terrifying Bladiki descended from the sky and rushed towards the purple-robed youth. That purple-robed youth panicked and hastily dodged, and barely saved his body from getting chopped. He got furious and shouted, "Who was that?" One could see a distant cyan figure appearing in the horizon, carrying a long blade in his hand. "Little brother." Seeing that cyan figure, Yi Feng was overjoyed and immediately shouted. Yi Shiwen slowly approached the battlefield. With a long blade in his hand, Yi Shiwen lightly said, "It's too early to celebrate your victory." All of the people looked towards him. Just now that Bladiki was released from so far? It seems that during this month, this Yi Zaiwen's strength has progressed by leaps and bounds. Standing at a distant place, Yan Qiliang thought while looking at Yi Shiwen. Although he was standing far from the battlefield, but he immediately discovered that it was Yi Shiwen. Yan Qiliang had just now witnessed the incredible might of Yi Zaiwen's blade attack, and he couldn't help but be somewhat startled in his heart. He certainly was aware of Yi Zaiwen's existence, but didn't know much about him. Although he had gathered information about the top disciples of strong sub-schools. After all, they might become his possible rivals. But why would he bother knowing about the top disciples of so many weak sub-schools? Earlier, Yi Shiwen had made a huge commotion, and that had got Yan Qiliang's attention only for a short time, because he didn't consider Yi Shiwen as someone worth knowing about. Back then, Yi Zaiwen's strength was almost comparable to that of ordinary Xiantian third-stage masters. With this level of strength, it was impossible for him to be ranked among the top players, who were generally at the peak of Xiantian third stage or above. Only by having this much strength, top players like Yan Qiliang would pay attention to masters of other sub-schools. Right now, he had no other choice but to pay attention to Yi Shiwen, but still not to the point of fear. However, he had discovered that Yi Shiwen had recently made a breakthrough, and his strength was no longer under the strength of peak Xiantian third stage. Originally, Yi Feng's sudden rise to the peak Xiantian third stage had surprised him, but he never thought that his younger brother, Yi Shiwen, would also have a breakthrough in such a short period of 1 month. He had started to doubt the reputation of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School as one of the weakest sub-schools, because this time, it had actually presented 2 top masters to the main sect, and this number was unexpectedly more than the 3 major sub-schools. He feared that the fame of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School was going to rise dramatically in the main sect. "Who are you? How dare you sneak an attack on me?" the purple-robed youth shouted in an angry voice. "Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School Yi Shiwen." Yi Shiwen indifferently said, "You are courting death." The purple-robed youth got even more furious, and why would he not? He had been nearly chopped down to a violent death. He suddenly dashed towards Yi Shiwen, and used his right leg to send a lightning-fast kick, accompanied with a twisting wind storm, directly at him. In a flash, Yi Shiwen waved his blade, and chopped out a sharp and terrifying Bladiki. Bang! 2 terrifying attacks severely collided against each other, and sent violent shock waves in the air, producing a sharp piercing sound. In an instant, their attacks had completely neutralized each other. The purple-robed youth never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually be so strong. It is not good. How is he so strong? The purple-robed youth pondered that now, with the unexpected appearance of Yi Shiwen, both sides had got 3 pairs of strong masters, and this was a bad sign for their plan. Now that there were 3 pairs of masters, they won't be able to finish this fight in a short time as they planned, and Yan Qiliang, who was currently watching from the distant place, would definitely take advantage of this. The face of purple-robed youth sank, and he shouted loudly, "Birth of the Fierce Winds!" This was the secret kick-based Xiantian-level power technique handed down in his family for generations. Relying on the might of this technique, his forefathers had brought fame to his family, which had gained a high reputation and influence in his hometown. Bang! He shoved his powerful kick into Yi Zaiwen's body, and was thrown back several steps from the explosion. Just as he was about to attack again, he was surprised to see that his attack had done no damage to Yi Shiwen, who just stood there like an iron wall. Yi Shiwen sneered and said, "You are only at this level?" The purple-robed youth's complexion suddenly changed and he muttered, "How is this possible?" He clearly knew the explosive strength present in his kick, and that was the reason why he had been thrown back several steps. But he was totally bewildered to find out that even after facing his kick's explosive strength at a point-blank range, Yi Shiwen simply didn't move at all. How could he be so strong? Yi Shiwen sneered, because just now, he had tried to test the strength of the purple-robed youth, and had finally determined that it was nothing. The purple-robed youth wanted to have an advantage of striking the first blow, and without wasting time, his leg moved and swept strong winds towards Yi Shiwen. Full Moon Beheader. Yi Shiwen chopped out his blade. The might of his blade was truly exquisite and peerless, and it released a terrifying bladiki which swept towards the strong winds. Although he had not yet practiced Full Moon Beheader to the Deshang realm, and had also not fully evolved its creative concept, but it still possessed the true might of a Xiantian-level move. However, none of his blade moves were stronger than the move, Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss, but using it even once consumed a significant amount of Zhen Qi, and he didn't want to use it unless it was necessary. Bang! The terrifying bladiki fiercely collided with the strong winds in the sky and wreaked havoc on the scene, and it seemed as if a tsunami had just swept past this area. Everyone was giving dumbfounded looks at this scene when suddenly, in an instant, the terrifying bladiki completely scattered the fierce winds and went straight towards the purple-robed youth and chopped down. The purple-robed youth turned into streamer and disappeared from the Huanma territory. Just one move. Yin Qiliang, spectating from a distant place, saw this with his own eyes and was totally bewildered. He never thought that a strong master like the purple-robed youth would actually be beheaded in just one strike from Yi Ziwen's blade. Yi Shiwen had fully displayed the true might of his blade, which could easily be considered very frightening, because just a single attack from his blade had actually killed a top-ranked Xiantian master. Yin Qiliang asked himself that his own strength and the strength of that purple-robed youth was about the same, and if he had been killed by Yi Shiwen in just one blade strike, then what would happen if he was to fight with Yi Shiwen? Everyone was shocked, because they thought that this battle was between two equally matched masters, and would be a fierce one. But they never expected it to be so one-sided. They actually did not know that in the last 1 month, Yi Shiwen had been constantly fighting with Huanma devils of Xiantian 4th stage, and had even severely wounded a Huanma of Xiantian 4th stage. Even if Huanma were small and weak creatures, but a Xiantian 4th stage Huanma was still powerful enough to give a tough time to the top players. Even if his strength was not yet comparable to the masters of Xiantian 4th stage, but it could be said that his strength had far surpassed the strength of masters of peak Xiantian 3rd stage, making him one of the top players. Chapter 101. The two beheaded. If they knew about the current strength of Yi Shiwen, then they wouldn't be so surprised. Right now, he was strong enough to easily take down a master of peak Xiantian 3rd stage, and could also contend with masters of Xiantian 4th stage. By killing the purple-robed youth in a single blade strike, he had instantly turned the wave of war. His sudden appearance had pushed the opposite party to a disadvantageous position. Yi Ziwen's mighty blade had instantly killed a top-ranked Xiantian master, and this had completely frightened those onlookers who were waiting to take advantage from this battle, after the two sides would mutually wound and kill each other. Even the leader of the opposite side, Shangguan Xuani, who was on the winning side a while ago, and had planned to finish this battle as soon as possible, had suddenly encountered an unforeseen obstacle to his plan. But their anxiousness was justified because Yi Ziwen's strength was really unfathomable. He had killed a master of peak Xiantian 3rd stage, as if it was nothing. Even Yin Qiliang was looking at him with a scared look in his eyes. Let alone other people. They could still think of facing top-ranked masters like Shangguan Xuani, Yin Qiliang and others, but facing Yi Shiwen? They feared that they would be killed in just one blade strike, without even getting a chance to fight back, which was really frightening. It was not that no one feared death, even if they knew that they would resurrect outside. The scene of getting chopped down by Yi Zaiwen's blade was just too scary. Damn, brother Yi is insanely strong. Zhang Yang looked at Yi Zaiwen's blade and said. At the same time, Wu Hao and Qian Wanru also nodded with a look of gratitude and respect in their eyes. They could feel that Yi Zaiwen's strength had increased abnormally in this 1 month's time, and this was not the first time because every once in a while, his strength would rise dramatically. But standing on one side, Yi Rushua seemed calm, as in her mind, she already thought of her brother as a metamorphosis. So like always, she was calm as if this was something normal for her younger brother. Yi Shiwen sneered and walked towards that eccentric yellow-robed youth. The yellow-robed youth immediately tensed up, because he had also witnessed the insane and mighty blade attack of Yi Shiwen. Brother, Yi Feng said in a pleasantly surprised voice. This time, he was in a very desperate situation in his fight with the yellow-robed youth, but he never thought that his younger brother would unexpectedly arrive in the nick of time and fully turn the flow of battle. Yi Shiwen nodded towards Yi Feng, but suddenly, that yellow-robed youth dashed towards Yi Shiwen with a lightning-fast speed and shot his palm. This attack was very amazing as the air in the surrounding had started to rupture under the sudden emergence of trembling Zhen Qi, which quickly went towards Yi Shiwen. The palm shadows had filled the sky, and it was obvious that this attack was meant to catch Yi Shiwen off guard, which was really cruel and ruthless. Yi Shiwen sneered, but how could he not be prepared? He immediately shot his palm and unleashed rushing thunder hand, discharging a rumbling thunder, and with a bang, a loud thunderclap resounded throughout the sky. Bang! 2 palm attacks collided fiercely, and the yellow-robed youth immediately staggered and almost fell down from the shock. But at this time, Shengguan Shuani instantly shot his ice-cold palm at Yi Shiwen, which froze the surrounding air. He clearly knew that among all the top masters present there, Yi Shiwen was biggest threat to his plan, and as long as he could kill Yi Shiwen, he would still have an opportunity to restore the situation. Otherwise, ultimately, he along with his plan would be completely obliterated at the hands of Yi Shiwen. Shengguan Shuani knew that he could not kill Yi Shiwen alone, so his only option was to team up with the yellow-robed youth and attack together. Yi Shiwen immediately sensed Shengguan Xuani's palm attack, and shot his palm once again, containing the terrifying might of past like thunder move like the wind, which released a thunder like Zhen Qi, and fiercely collided with the ice-cold Zhen Qi. Bang! 2 groups of Zhen Qi collided and blasted shock waves in all directions. Shengguan Shuani was thrown back several steps, and secretly complained about the incredible strength of Yi Shiwen in his heart. But at this time, the yellow-robed youth rushed once again towards Yi Shiwen, although he was collaborating with Shengguan Shuani, but this was only a temporary cooperation, as he had ulterior motives. However, right now he could not attend to his motives because his top priority was to kill Yi Shiwen, otherwise, all of them would be killed instead. Yi Feng also wanted to go and help, but when he saw that Yi Shiwen was easily handling both of their attacks, as if he was just playing with them, then he decided not to interfere. When the duo had teamed up to attack, they had soon gotten used to timing their attacks, and were displaying a perfect team play expecting to push Yi Shiwen in a disadvantageous situation. But in a while, Yi Shiwen had easily adapted to their combined assault. After playing around with them for a while, the next time they shot their attacks at him, he suddenly released a terrifying bladiki and displayed the creative concept of full moon beheader. Bang! The creative concept turned into the picture of a bright moon descending from the clouds and directly collided with their combined attack and crushed it. Then it finally descended towards the 2 masters. They couldn't resist against the terrifying might of this attack, and turned into streamers and vanished from the Huanhua territory. Without these 2 top masters out of the picture, the people of their team knew that it was over for them, and immediately began to disperse. Although Bingdao Subschool was a major subschool with a lot of Xiantian masters, but so was Jade Lady Subschool, and under the leadership of top masters like Yi Feng, Zhang Sun Yuan and Yi Shiwen, they would be quickly killed by the opposite party. And the crowd of spectating disciples waiting for an opportunity also started to leave in abundance, and did not dare to stay for a long time. They knew very well that if the disciples of opposite party lost their temper and started to attack, Then in the presence of these three top masters, especially Yi Shiwen, they would only meet an unexpected calamity. Third brother, this time we were saved thanks to you, Yi Feng said, and walked towards Yi Shiwen with a smile on his face, and somewhat sighing with emotion. If Yi Shiwen had not descended from the sky like an angel to save them, then they would really have met an awful end. It's nothing but brother. Yi Shiwen looked at Yi Feng, and was surprised to find out that his brother had actually reached the peak of Xiantian third stage. But last time, he was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, which meant that in a period of 1 month, his cultivation had unexpectedly jumped 2 stages. This situation was too weird. This was truly bizarre. Yi Zaiwen's mind couldn't grasp it at all. Brother, could it be that you a blood yuan fruit? An idea suddenly cropped up in Yi Zaiwen's mind. Because, only while having a breakthrough in the Xiantian second stage, and consuming a blood yuan fruit, one could have a dramatic increase in cultivation and strength in a short time. However, this was not right, as his elder brother was definitely not an unwise person. Everyone knew that after entering into the Xiantian realm, the later one would consume this precious blood yuan fruit, the better would be the effects. The best time to consume it was during having a breakthrough in Xiantian second stage, or while breaking through from Xiantian 8th stage to Xiantian 9th stage. As the later one would consume this fruit, the bigger would be the benefits. That's how it was. Chapter 102. Assessment ends. Even during the time when Yi Shiwen was in Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, he knew how precious a blood yuan fruit actually was for Xiantian masters. If it was not extremely valuable, then why would it attract the attention of so many people? Although it was only valuable for the masters of Xiantian realm, but there were 1 million Xiantian masters in the main sect, and most of them were stuck at bottlenecks, so one could imagine the preciousness of blood yuan fruit in their eyes. From the moment he had obtained a blood yuan fruit, Yi Shiwen had decided that he would wait until the day he would have his breakthrough from the Xiantian 8th stage to Xiantian 9th stage, because at that time, having a breakthrough would be very difficult, and it would take a lot of effort. He would also need treasures like blood yuan fruit to help him during the breakthrough. Many people could never reach the Xiantian 7th or 8th stage, even after practicing throughout their lives. They would stay on Xiantian 5th stage for a lifetime, because it was considered a big threshold. Those who could cross this threshold would become intermediate-level personnel in Yiyuan School's main sect, and the most incompetent ones would be sent to become elders at the sub-schools. But those who could get past this threshold could only spend their lifetime as lower-level staff. Even if Yi Feng had used the blood yuan fruit during his breakthrough from Xiantian 5th stage to 6th stage, then it was worth it. But he used it at only the 1st stage, which was such a pity. Later, Yi Shiwen heard from various disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, and finally came to know the ins and outs of everything that had happened during his absence. After Yi Feng and the group of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School had separated from him, they met the group of Jade Lady Sub-School and helped them in repelling a Huanma raid. Afterwards, the two groups cooperated to attain their goal of searching and killing as many Huanma devils as they could. While fighting and killing the Huanma, they encountered a very formidable Huanma of Xiantian 5th stage, which seemed to have high intelligence, and at that moment, it was next to a coffin. After the two groups discussed for a bit, they decided to fight and kill the Huanma, which was still mourning next to the coffin. After killing it as expected, they obtained a magical sound flute, which was actually a spiritual tool, although it was only a low-level spiritual tool. But after reaching the Xiantian stages above Xiantian 5th stage, the Xiantian Jinqi would transform into Xiantian Jinyuan, and then it would be possible to drive a spiritual tool to display its infinite power, not to mention, using a magical sound flute, one could display the rare spiritual sonic attack, making this flute even more precious. This was the reason when the news about the flute had leaked out, it had attracted Shengguan Shuani and others. Yi Shiwen looked at the dark-colored flute, hanging on the waist of Zhangsun Yuan, and sighed, then shook his head. How could he not understand that his brother liked Zhangsun Yuan, and was even willing to let go of a precious spiritual tool for that? Even though a spiritual tool could be used only after surpassing the Xiantian 5th stage, But one should know that even among the core disciples of the main sect, only less than 10% of them had spiritual tools. This magical sound flute was unimaginably precious, but Yi Feng didn't feel the slightest heartache from losing it. Yi Shiwen thought that this matter of Yi Feng consuming the blood yuan fruit so early was definitely related to Zhongsun Yuan. Yi Feng was at the peak of Xiantian first stage, and even if he had a breakthrough, he could only reach the Xiantian second stage. But Zhongsun Yuan was already at the peak of Xiantian third stage. So, this might be the reason why Yi Feng had decided to consume the blood yuan fruit, because now, like Zhongsun Yuan, he was also at the peak of Xiantian third stage, and thanks to the benefits of blood yuan fruit, it wouldn't be long before he would again have a breakthrough to the Xiantian fourth stage, and then, he could proudly be alongside Zhongsun Yuan. Regarding this matter, the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were also well aware of, so they were not commenting about why the magical sound flute was with Zhongsun Yuan. Yi Shiwen sighed, and also didn't say anything. He certainly didn't have any opinion because marriage, giving birth and so on, even if the warriors tried their best to avoid these, they couldn't, as this was a type of instinct that continued the life. Although it was said that the goal of a master should be to continue practicing and get rid of the worldly desires, gain immortality, but it was all just a legend. In this world, there were many heroes and no one knew who would die, who would become invincible. However, that was something in the future, and who knew what would happen afterwards. Moreover, no one knew about Zhongsun Yuan's feelings. But it was easy to ascertain the feelings of Zhongsun Yuan, as Yi Feng's attitude towards her was very obvious, and was clearly indicating that he liked her. But there she was showing no signs of dislike, and it seemed like it was possible that they would get together very soon. Yi Shiwen was also trying to learn some of the tricks used by his big brother. After all, in his past life, he had seen various cultures and prosperous civilizations, and there were a variety of special tricks used by the guys to impress girls, and he had learnt some of them back then. After all, they could become useful anytime. In Yi Ziwen's mind, a myriad of thoughts were constantly welling up, but he did not display any expression on his face, and glanced at the crowd of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. This time, they had faced serious losses with 10 dead, but the remaining people had become stronger compared to the last time he had seen them. Many of them were on the border of having a breakthrough, and then they would enter into the Xiantian realm. The strongest expert besides Yi Feng was Zhang Yang, who had already transformed 30% Xiantian Jinqi, and had achieved the Xiantian Xiaoqan stage, and had also consolidated his state with a very steady breath. Once he would transform 40% Xiantian Jinqi, he would be able to reach the peak of Xiantian second stage. Wu Hao and Qian Wanru had actually reached the Xiantian first stage by transforming 10% Xiantian Jinqi. Yi Ruxue had also shown a great progress, as she had steadily transformed 20% Xiantian Jinqi and had reached the peak of Xiantian first stage. During this month, everyone had shown great progress. Yi Shiwen nodded as he knew that only by colliding with talented and strong evildoers, one could have rapid and unceasing advancement in strength. If they were still at the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, they wouldn't have shown this kind of fast progress, because only in the presence of strong peers, one wouldn't slack off, and would always strive to get stronger. But anyways, the assessment had finally ended, and it was time for the allocation of disciples in various peaks. Chapter 103 enters into the Tongtian Peak. Inside the palace hall of Tongtian Peak, two figures could be seen walking side by side. They were Yan Qiliang and Yi Shiwen. Brother, yes, blade technique is really amazing. I am afraid very few among the disciples would be able to display this kind of superb blade skill. Yan Qiliang said, there are a lot of talented individuals among the disciples, and many of them know blade techniques. Yi Shiwen lightly replied, Brother Yi is being modest. When it comes to strength, there are many strong masters among the disciples, and maybe more powerful than us. But when your blade skills come into picture, I have not seen anyone displaying the creative concept of a blade technique, like you did back then. Even among the inner disciples of the main sect, very few can achieve such a feat, Yan Qiliang said with a smile. It was not that Yin Qiliang was intending to curry favor from Yi Shiwen, but 3 days ago, that display of the creative concept of Yi Ziwen's blade technique was truly unforgettable and had thoroughly imprinted on the minds of everyone who witnessed it, including Yin Qiliang. 3 days had passed after the completion of the assessment examination. Everyone had entered into one peak or the other, but they never thought that they would get a chance to witness a strange scene where a group of old men was chasing Yi Shiwen to grab him and monopolize him for their respective peaks. Yi Shiwen also thought that Yuan School was so big, and almost every year, many talented individuals would emerge from here. Every 3 years, it held an assessment examination, and had continued to do so for God knows how many years, in which numerous geniuses had emerged, but a strange scene like this, where a group of old people were rushing to grab a disciple, had never happened before. Just what kind of multi-talented evildoer was he? In this world, there were no devices or tests to check who was more talented than the other. It was all decided by the display of strength, and even if there was such a thing to test one's talent, Yi Shiwen never considered himself as the most outstanding one. So why would these old men chase after him? Of course, high-level attention was inevitable. As to which high-level personnel's attention he had attracted, he did not know. The next day, he got the news that he had been assigned to the Tongtian Peak, which was considered as one of the top 10 prominent peaks of Yuan School's main sect, and it was definitely not one of the bottom ones among the 10. And among those who had entered into the Tongtian Peak, he knew only a few, and Yin Qiliang was one of them. Yi Feng, Zhang Yang and Wu Hao had entered into the Full Moon Peak. Zhang Sun Yuan, Yi Ruxue and Qian Wanru had entered into the Jade Lady Peak. Basically, they had been allocated to different peaks. Of course, Full Moon Peak was the best among them, but it was never guaranteed that as long as one possessed great strength, he would be assigned to the best peak. The allocation was done keeping in mind the balanced development of all the top 10 peaks. If they only wanted to strengthen the Full Moon Peak, then why would they even need to have the other 9 peaks? Although there was still a gap between the strengths of the peaks, but that was the reason why this type of allocation system was followed to maintain the overall balance of power. After getting assigned to the Tongtian Peak, Yi Shiwen saw many unfamiliar faces, but among them, Yin Qiliang was a relatively familiar person, and had quickly got acquainted with him. As far as the disciples from other sub-schools were concerned, they would gradually get to know each other and come together. In addition to the two of them, there were more than 200 disciples assigned to the Tongtian Peak. As Yin Qiliang was one of the top masters soon, all of these new disciples had gathered to his side. Before entering into the main sect, the new disciples were not allowed to form factions, but that was not the case after entering into the main sect. Now they could form factions because if they didn't, then they would most likely be bullied by the senior disciples. Unlike the sub-schools, in the main sect, new disciples would generally form factions, as when they were in their respective sub-schools, they didn't need to form factions because they would have to enter the main sect someday. But after entering into the main sect, things would change. The disciples would form factions, and years later, when these disciples would become true disciples, they would still have these factions. In the Yuan School, there were many well-known factions, led by hundreds of true disciples, and excluding some true disciples who preferred to stay alone, almost all of the true disciples had their own factions with a powerful figure as the faction leader. The current triennial assessment examination was a good opportunity to pull the cronies into the faction. As for the factions formed by the true disciples, they would only accept core disciples as the members, and unless there was an extremely talented individual among the new disciples who had managed to impress them, it was highly unlikely for the new disciples to enter into those high-level factions. Generally, these factions created by the new disciples were headed by star disciples like Yi Shiwen and Yin Qiliang. But Yi Shiwen was not interested in forming a faction. Those true disciples would form factions and manage them themselves, but he was not at all interested in leading or managing other new disciples. So forming a faction was out of question. Other new disciples of the Tongtian Peak had sensed that Yi Shiwen was not interested in making a faction, so they had flocked around Yin Qiliang. In addition to Yin Qiliang, and more than 200 disciples. Among the new disciples, there was yet another group composed of foreign disciples, led by the yellow-robed disciple, who had been beheaded by Yi Shiwen in the Huanma territory. During these days, Yi Shiwen found out that his name was Huang Yilin, an outstanding disciple from Huang Yu sect. It was considered a big clan, although it was not comparable to Yiyuan school, but was still a tyrannical force. As they said, it was easy to survive in a group. Now the two of us have entered into the Tongtian Peak. Later we may enter the same sect, so I would like Brother Yi to advise me. Yan Qiliang said, although Yi Shiwen was younger than him. But in this world, strong people would command respect, and Yi Ziwen's strength was above him. That is, if in the future, we enter the same sect, then I would also expect mutual support. Yi Shiwen said with a smile, because he didn't want to openly show his indifference, as it would only invite new enemies. Right now, Brother Yan has become the leader of a lot of new disciples, which is quite amazing. When the time comes, I would expect a lot of help from you. Yi Shiwen said with some ridicule for Yan Qiliang, as he had a favorable impression for the guy, although he was somewhat sophisticated and shrewd. But in general, he was a fairly open and candid guy. Yan Qiliang wryly smiled and said, "It looks okay for now, but in few days, the faction of those senior disciples would come into action, then things will start to get difficult for us. Brother Yi, to be honest with you, yesterday 2 factions of true disciples came looking for me. I just hope I can join them." True disciples? Yi Shiwen said in a startled manner. Well, Yan Qiliang nodded, and a wry smile appeared on his face. These high-level factions didn't care about average new disciples, but Yan Qiliang was definitely not an average individual, even if he was not as good as Yi Shiwen, but he was powerful enough to impress the high-level factions. Yi Shiwen was silent for a moment. If the factions of those true disciples were trying to recruit new disciples, then it wouldn't be good to refuse them. If I am not wrong, they will soon come to ask you, do you want to join their faction as well? Chapter 104. Senior disciples are big bullies. If I am not wrong, they will soon come to ask you, do you want to join their faction as well? Yan Qiliang asked. When Yi Shiwen was not interested in forming or joining an ordinary faction, then why would he want to join the faction of a true disciple? But he won't be able to refuse if they come to invite him, because if he did, it would only represent the beginning of a big trouble. If the faction belonged to an open-minded true disciple, then it was okay to refuse them. But if it belonged to some arrogant true disciple, then after getting rejected, he was bound to retaliate. Seeing the silent appearance of Yi Shiwen, Yan Qiliang couldn't help but smile bitterly. Becoming the faction leader was definitely not good. Although he would have the support of many new disciples, but their faction would still not be very durable. Sooner or later, other factions would send their people to snatch new disciples for their factions, and if they didn't agree, they would face the collaborated suppression from the major factions. These newcomers were considered outstanding disciples of their respective subschools. However, after entering into the main sect, their strength could only be considered mediocre. Among the 200 new disciples, only 20 or so were truly worthy of being called strong, and were the masters of Xiantian realm, and the remaining more than 180 were just outer disciples, who were still in the Hotian realm, and their status was only a little better than the status of the handyman disciples. In the past, some outstanding new disciples had tried to form their own factions, and had contended against the factions of the senior disciples, but soon, their newly formed faction had been disbanded under the collaborated suppression of the senior factions. Yi Shiwen sighed as deep in his heart. He didn't want to join factions, because once joined, he would be urged to have human contacts, and that would completely ruin his concentration, which would ultimately decrease the pace of his cultivation growth. There was a lot of competition in the main sect, and he didn't want to waste time on all this. He silently returned to his freshman's small courtyard. All of the new disciples had received these courtyards where they could live and practice. If it was a top core disciple of the main sect, he would have an independent palace on the mountain, and true disciples had their own personal mountain peaks. People of different strengths received different treatment, based on their status and positions. Yi Shiwen entered his courtyard. Although inner disciples could only have small independent courtyards, but these courtyards were quite exquisite, with pavilions, rock garden with running water, just like a botanical garden. In the entire courtyard, small sections of spiritual arteries were buried underground, which would induce large amount of divine ling qi in entire courtyard. And looking from afar, one could see xian qi in abundance, making the courtyard look like the dwelling place of immortals. A variety of Jin methods to attract the divine ling qi, defensive Jin methods, Jin method to concentrate Xinjing qi, and so on were carved on the ground, but the core method to activate these Jin methods was known only to the owner of the courtyard. No wonder everyone wants to enter into the main sect. This practice environment is 100 times better compared with that of the sub-schools. Yi Shiwen sighed and said, the talented disciples coming from these sub-schools would get various resources, and after practicing in this kind of favorable practice environment of main sect, they would be able to rapidly grow stronger compared to when they were in the sub-schools, because here, they would have rapid advancements and quicker breakthroughs. Even the outer disciples had been provided with one room per person, and these rooms also had various Jin methods prepared inside, although the rooms were small but fully equipped. This time he went to the Gongda Palace Hall of Tongtian Peak to receive his rewards, and for displaying outstanding performance in the assessment examination, he got a total of 5,000 spirit stones from the Tongtian Peak, which allowed his total stock of spirit stones to reach a total of 7,000 spirit stones. All the policies of the sect were generally inclined in favor of the talented disciples, and it was made sure that the talented disciples would receive the best resources, and in greater amounts. In addition to the spirit stones, he also got a variety of medicinal pills, some for healing, some for supplementing Zhen Qi, etc. But Yi Shiwen was very much happy to receive a Xian Jindan. Its efficacy and effects were similar to that of the blood yuan fruit. However, it was still not comparable to a blood yuan fruit, because it only gave short-term effects, and though it could help during the breakthrough, but its utility was limited for only the masters of Xiantian 5th stage or below. In addition to Yi Shiwen, only Yin Qiliang got a Xian Jindan for his outstanding performance. But Yi Shiwen believed that the sect's inclination towards giving top resources to only the outstanding disciples would only work towards increasing the gap between geniuses and ordinary people. In addition to these, there were some clothes, completely made of ice cicada silk, warm in winter and cool in summer. Moreover, the defense offered by these clothes was very strong, and could give good protection from weapons. These clothes were similar to the cicada silk armor of Yi Shiwen, but here in the Yi Yuan school, they were present in abundance. Besides these, there were all sorts of equipments which clearly demonstrated the excessive wealth of Yi Yuan school. One could say that joining the main sect did not represent the end, but an entirely new beginning. Yi Shiwen was about to start closed-door training when suddenly, from outside his courtyard, he heard the sound of rapid footsteps, and then a voice reached his ears. Brother Yi, come in." Yi Shiwen released the defensive Zhen method, as he was the owner of the courtyard, and only he had the authority to unlock the defensive method. Otherwise no one would be able to enter. Even the intruders would have to attack with the Zhen method to barge in. Right then, a disciple, who appeared to be in his 20s, ran into the room and looked at Yi Shiwen with an anxious look on his face. "What happened?" Yi Shiwen asked. This disciple was one of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, and was the only disciple from Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, other than Yi Shiwen, who had also been assigned to the Tongtian Peak. "Those senior disciples go too far. They have joined up to suppress us." The disciple said, "For the last few days, those senior factions have been sending people to pull people from among us, but our fellow brothers and sisters have decided to join the faction led by Brother Yan. So they began to force us, and said that we need to surrender our monthly salary as compensation to them. And if not paid, then they would start to bully us every day." Yi Shiwen frowned. So these senior disciples had truly gone too far. But it was still understandable, as the new disciples were often the source of new members for these factions, and they had to wait 3 years for the assessment examination to recruit members. But now that these new disciples wanted to create a separate faction, then of course, they would collaborate together to suppress the new faction. Even if the new disciples didn't disband their new faction and decided to surrender their monthly salary as compensation, then their practice speed would inevitably be adversely affected. This was really a ruthless tactic. Chapter 105. Either disband or die for those senior disciples. This was none other than trying to get more members for their faction, by hook or by crook. But as far as these new disciples were concerned, this was a matter of life and death. These new disciples were considered the outstanding top disciples in their respective subschools. And after coming to the main sect and training in this new favorable environment, it was only a matter of time when they would be able to catch up with those senior disciples in terms of cultivation level and strength. So no one was willing to join someone else's faction and become the bottom members, just to be ordered around by them. So when Yan Qiliang, a top disciple among them, wanted to draw them in and form a faction, they would naturally be willing to do so. Now they have blocked the gate, forcefully asking us to surrender the monthly compensation, which is simply going too far. The disciple said and clenched his teeth. Basically, the senior disciples were forcing them to either disband their new faction, or they would be crushed forcefully. No matter which option they chose, it was not going to produce a good result. In the hearts of these new disciples, Yan Qiliang had already taken place as the leader of their faction, and naturally, Yi Shiwen was already the core of their confidence. Although Yi Shiwen had not publicly pulled anyone into the faction, but everyone knew about his incredible strength, and also knew that he would definitely back them up if something happened. Yi Shiwen said, "I will go and take a look." He was also related to this matter. After all, he was also one of the disciples who had been charged with paying a monthly compensation, and how could he just sit back and let them take his hard-earned monthly salary, which was also the source of his quick progress? Sooner or later, he would have to get involved, so why shouldn't he get involved now itself? If Brother Yi is going to come in action, then there certainly won't be any problem. The disciple said in an overjoyed tone, but he originally knew that Yi Shiwen would definitely lend a helping hand to them. After all, before, he had always shown a righteous nature, and that disciple was well aware of that. Also, he knew that Yi Shiwen was not interested in forming or joining a faction. So if he got to know that senior disciples were trying to forcefully recruit members, then he would naturally react. Yi Shiwen followed the disciple out of his own small courtyard. Only the new disciples, who had arrived this year, lived in the freshman courtyard. And although the inner disciples controlled the courtyard, but the outer disciples also lived in the same courtyard. There was no separation between the housing of inner and outer disciples, and the new disciples had no choice, because only after becoming core disciples, they would be able to choose a place to live. Until then, all of them would have to live together in the same courtyard. After coming out of the courtyard, he saw the crowd of many new disciples concentrated at the intersection, and they were being led by Yan Qiliang. At this time, Yan Qiliang had an unsightly complexion, because 10 senior disciples were blocking the intersection. There were indifferent looks on the faces of these senior disciples, while they were looking at the new disciples. And their leader was a black-robed youth, who looked approximately 25-year-old. He stepped forward and said, "I won't waste any time on nonsense. I give you 2 options. First, each of you hand over your monthly salary as compensation. Second, disband your faction." The words of this senior disciple aroused the anger of the new disciples. After all, this was no different than cornering all of them. "We know that you are doing this just to corner all of us." A new disciple said angrily, "We can let you off, and it's very simple. As long as you dissolve this shitty faction of yours and join our foodie faction, then we will take you in, and you can also save your monthly salary." The black-robed youth sneered and said, "I'm quite looking forward to take a look at the compensation. I heard that a lot of geniuses have entered into the main sect this year, so all of them must have got rich rewards. I can't wait to see." The faces of many new disciples immediately suffused with anger. They were the elite core disciples of their respective subschools, but right now, they were being bullied. On the way, Yi Shiwen heard from the disciple that the faction who had come to bully them was named Foodie Faction and had been started by a core disciple. There were more than 100 members in this faction, and all of them were Xiantian masters. However, this faction was considered as moderately strong compared to the factions started by the core disciples. I advise you to disband your faction as soon as possible. I have seen many cocky new disciples in the past trying to form their own faction. They too were unyielding in the beginning, but in the end, they also had to submit. The new outer disciples are more sensible than you lot, as they have already disbanded their faction and joined our faction. The black-robed youth indifferently said, "You are going too far with the bullying." Yan Qiliang said in a calm and collected manner, "So what if we are going too far?" The black-robed youth sneered again and again, then said, "It seems that you people only understand the language of fists. I heard that you are a top disciple among this year's new disciples, and that's why they have decided to make you the leader. I'd like to see what you got." The black-robed youth sneered. Then suddenly, a claw congealed around his palm, and in a flash, with a loud boom, it rushed to grab the skull of Yan Qiliang. "Shameless!" Yan Qiliang shouted loudly, and his aura completely broke out, and then an endless amount of flaming red Jin Qi wrapped around his arm, like fire in general, and he instantly blasted a punch towards the incoming claw. Boom! Both claw and fist fiercely collided, and an endless amount of Jin Qi spread in the surrounding, sending out terrifying whirlwind in all directions. Both of them took a step back, because unexpectedly, they had almost equal strengths. The black-robed youth's complexion suddenly changed. He did not think that Yan Qiliang's strength would actually be this fierce, although he had heard that a lot of genius disciples had arrived at the main sect this year. But he did not care. After all, he had joined the main sect 9 years ago, and was 10 years ahead of Yan Qiliang. However, he had miscalculated because at their age, 10 years were not enough to decide pretty much anything, but still, he had practiced for more than a decade longer than Yan Qiliang, and still couldn't suppress him. This had brought a hint of jealousy in his eyes, which quickly turned into a killing intent, caused by the envy. How could this guy have so much talent? Yan Qiliang had not even started to practice inside the main sect, and could still contend with him. In order to achieve his present strength, black-robed youth had spent a whole decade as the outer disciple, and now, he had finally reached the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage. While not at the top, but he could at least play the role of a bully to forcefully recruit members. But what just happened? With a look of envy in his eyes, the black-robed disciple once again stormed towards Yan Qiliang. Yan Qiliang also sneered and rushed forward to face his attack. As the two sides were fiercely fighting, violent explosion sounds continued to spread. Their punches were casing air explosions, and as their fight grew more intense, the new disciples had to go back several steps, and they did not even dare to stay near this menacing battle. Both of them loathed each other, so one could see the seriousness of their fight. Although the strength of Yan Qiliang was essentially stronger, but the black-robed youth had more battle experience. Thus he could kill Yan Qiliang if caught off guard. But Yan Qiliang was also getting familiar with the attack patterns of the black-robed youth, so defeating him was only a matter of time. But at this time, the other 9 senior disciples noticed the problem that the black-robed disciple was facing. Their eyesight was far developed compared to these new disciples, as it was something that one would gain with time and experience. Chapter 106. Set up their own faction. But at this time, the other 9 senior disciples noticed the problem that the black-robed disciple was facing. Their eyesight was far developed compared to these new disciples, as it was something that one would gain with time and experience. At this time, these senior disciples immediately rushed forward in order to assist the black-robed youth, when all of a sudden, a terrifying bladiki instantly descended from the sky and chopped down in front of them. This terrifying bladiki instantly split out a huge rift in the ground, extending several meters. Could it be that you senior disciples can only bully others based on your numerical advantage? Yi Shiwen said in a cold voice while pointing his long blade towards them. Among those 9 disciples, there were many at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, and weren't one bit weaker than the black-robed youth. But at this time, all of them were covered in cold sweat. If they had been a little faster a moment ago, that blade attack would have really beheaded all of them. And just thinking about it, they had been completely stunned. Even they had to admit, if they had not been attentive, they would definitely have been split in half. Just from the fierceness and might present in that blade attack, they had realized that this blade-wielding boy would absolutely not show them any mercy the next time. Although they had heard that a lot of talented disciples had joined the main sect this year, but they didn't expect to see so many formidable Xiantian masters. During the former years, if a new disciple who had entered into the Xiantian realm, then he was considered an extremely outstanding disciple. However, this year, there were just way too many new disciples who had already entered into the Xiantian realm. In the past, they could easily bully those new disciples and would force them to join their faction. But among this year's new disciples, there were some very thorny existences like Yan Chiling and this boy wielding a long blade. They never thought that these new disciples would prove to be so hard to deal with. When they had been sent by the Fudi faction to completely suppress these new disciples, they never expected such an outcome. However, right now, they were entirely sure that if they dared to take even a step further, that blade-wielding boy wouldn't hesitate to behead them right there right then. And if they tried to tell about this matter to the high-level members of their faction, then they would definitely die in vain. The sudden appearance of Yi Shiwen had completely cornered them. They had come to bully the weak, and their plan had failed. And if they go to tell the elders about this incident, then they would only end up as a laughingstock. The new disciples were looking at Yi Shiwen with a look of worship in their eyes. Of course, they admired Yan Chiling for fighting against a senior disciple on equal terms, but they simply worshipped Yi Shiwen, as he had used just one blade attack, and 9 senior disciples had completely paused and were scared to take a single step forward or backward. They had repressed the feelings of hatred after being oppressed by these top disciples for all these days, but these feelings had finally been vented out thanks to Yi Shiwen. With the unexpected appearance of Yi Shiwen, after a while, the black-robed youth was unable to cope up with the suppressive attacks of Yan Chiling, and continued to dodge one attack after the other. But after a while, Yan Chiling found an opening and managed to hit a punch on his body. The black-robed youth was sent flying after receiving that punch from Yan Chiling, and heavily fell on the ground, then fell unconscious. "Take him and get lost next time. I won't show any mercy," Yan Chiling gasped and said. The senior disciples did not stay. It would be ridiculous if they stayed there, especially when Yi Shiwen was eyeing them like a killing god. They would never dare to stay there for a long time. "Brother Yi, this time we were saved thanks to your help." Yan Chiling looked at those departing senior disciples, and couldn't help, but said with a smile on his face, "It was nothing." Yi Shiwen said, "Brother Yan, I think that we should form a faction." Yi Shiwen still didn't want to be part of a faction, but he preferred to be a part of one than being chased down by others. After all, it was somewhat troublesome, and he wouldn't be able to run away for too long. And even if he was careful and tried to avoid joining any faction, but these people knew where he lived, so rather than joining a faction, it was better for him to form one. "Brother Yi, you mean?" Yan Chiling said in a delighted tone. Although originally, their faction was just in the prototype stage, and he could be considered a strong leader who could run a faction. But if Yi Shiwen was willing to join them, then things would be entirely different, because Yi Ziwen's addition to their faction had suddenly increased their strength by many times, and had greatly improved the appeal as well. "I am just enrolling. I won't manage the matters inside the faction." Yi Shiwen said that as he didn't want to divert his concentration from practicing to anything else, and even if he had made this decision, but he still wanted to enjoy his unrestrained complete freedom. "No problem," Yan Chiling excitedly said. With the addition of Yi Shiwen to the faction, the appeal would immediately increase, and the most important thing was that Yi Shiwen did not want to get involved in the management, so the power would be in his hands. So this was a double benefit for him. Everybody, please pay attention to what I am going to say. I once again announced that I, together with Brother Yi, am planning to jointly form a faction, and any of the new disciples can join us, Yan Chiling said in a loud voice. Earlier, the faction was just in name, but after this announcement, and with the addition of Yi Shiwen to the faction, it was finally going to officially form. Some of the new disciples hesitated, because before they were sticking close to Yan Qiliang, as they knew that survival was very difficult in the main sect, and only by sticking together, one could stay away from unforeseen danger. As Yan Qiliang was a top disciple, who had leader-like characteristics, so they had decided to stick with him until things would settle down. Then they would walk away anytime. But after they would join the faction, they would be unable to walk away as it would be equivalent to betraying the faction, and it was absolutely not allowed. In any faction, members were not allowed to leave, unless and until they were strong enough to do so. "I will join." A new disciple raised his hand and said, "I have had enough of these senior disciples bullying us. I don't want to be bullied anymore, and getting together is the only way out." "Right, I will also join. I will join as well. If those senior disciples can create factions, then we would form our own." "You are right. If they can do it, then so can we. After all, we were once the outstanding disciples of our sub-schools, and there's nothing we can't achieve," a disciple said. The other new disciples were also stimulated by this sudden series of approvals, and a large number of new disciples came forward to form the faction. In the past, one more faction had been formed by the new disciples, which later became one of the super factions, and its might stretched across the 10 prominent peaks. The leader of this faction was a true disciple, and was also one of the strongest individuals in the Yiyuan school. "Good. Since everybody is willing to join the faction, then our faction has now been officially established, but we must give it a name. Does anyone know a good name for the faction?" Yan Qiliang asked. Many disciples rushed to say several names, but these names couldn't satisfy the crowd. Finally, a disciple suggested the name Qianyu faction, and it got the consent of most of the disciples, and hence was made the official name of the faction. Many of the disciples were somewhat excited, because from now on, they would be known as the members of the Qianyu faction, and no one could guess how big their faction would grow in the future. Chapter 107. Towards the deepest parts of sect. After the creation of Qianyu faction, Yi Shiwen did not participate in the faction matters, and left all management works to Yan Qiliang, who was obviously handling these matters with ease, as managing was a familiar task for him, as he had gained experience as the strongest disciple of the Divine Volcano Sub-School. Yi Shiwen returned to his own small courtyard, and about this aspect, he and Yan Qiliang had a tacit understanding. Whether these factions would thrive or fail relied on the managing qualities of its leader, and so long as the leader was formidable and had outstanding leading qualities, then even with 2 or 3 members, the faction could become very formidable. But if the leader was not strong enough, then the faction was bound to disband. At this time, Yan Qiliang and Yi Shiwen were the only formidable members of Qianyu faction, but they were strong enough to hoist the flag of their faction in front of everyone. Yi Shiwen realized that perhaps things won't stay so calm in the future, but since he had already decided to join a faction, then he would need to become a lot stronger to back it up. Yi Shiwen had no alternatives, and he didn't have any escape routes as well, as he was already aware of the arrogant attitude of those other factions, who would never allow the growth of a faction created by new disciples, and would use any good opportunity to crush them along with their faction. So whether it was to protect oneself or to safeguard the future, he must strive now and prepare himself. Moreover, in his heart, a feeling of comparison had also come into being, that if some people had already done it before, then there was no reason why he won't achieve it. At present, Yi Ziwen's strength had increased considerably compared to his strength 1 month ago, when he had just entered into the Xiantian second stage. As he had transformed 60% Xiantian Jinqi, his fighting strength was comparable to or even more than that of the peak Xiantian third stage master. And now, it was time for him to have a breakthrough. After having a breakthrough and reaching the Xiantian third stage, he would be able to easily beat a master of Xiantian fourth stage. After making up his mind, Yi Shiwen left his small courtyard and immediately went into the direction of Gongda Palace Hall. Tongtian Peak's Gongda Palace Hall looked more luxurious and elaborate, and was also the role model for the Gongda Palace halls of other sub-schools. Therefore, Yi Shiwen did not actually find it strange after entering the Gongda Palace Hall. After entering the hall first, he turned in 1,000 spirit stones and converted them into 1,000 points. Now his total stock of spirit stones had decreased to a total of 6,000 spirit stones. But he was not sad, because he knew that there were a lot of things that spirit stones couldn't buy, and it was necessary to exchange them for school points. But this fact could be considered as a part of the hidden benefits offered at the main sect. Yi Shiwen immediately redeemed the 1,000 points for a red-crowned crane that would become his flying mount for traveling. This red-crowned crane was one of the demon birds used by people as mounts, and were raised in the Yiyuan school's main sect. Because of their gentle nature, good control and relationship with the rider, they had become the preferred means of transport for many disciples. And thanks to the blood of demon beasts running through their veins, these cranes could fly for thousands of miles without taking rest. However, these demon birds were naturally not cheap, and besides Yi Shiwen, only filthy rich inner disciples could afford a red-crowned crane. And this number was not more than 200 to 300 people out of several thousand inner disciples. Yi Shiwen had chosen a tall crane standing up to more than 2 meters tall, and it was an extremely good means for flying through the air. After Yi Shiwen activated the control method for the red-crowned crane and used the password, it blinked once and jumped high in the sky, and after coming to a stop, it opened its huge wings and flew at a lightning speed towards the depths of the Yiyuan school. Using the control method, he could directly use his thoughts to communicate with the crane, and that's how he was manipulating the speed and direction of the flight. Yiyuan school was stacked with many mountain ranges and spreading across each other, and even if he was so high from the ground, he could still hear the roars of countless demon beasts present on those mountains. And as he was flying towards the deeper parts of the Yiyuan school, these roars were growing even louder. It was said that Yiyuan school had captured and raised many demon beasts in this mountain forest spread in several square kilometers of area, compared to which, the mountain forest of Qingfeng Mountain was nothing. In the main sect, these demon beasts, devils and other unusual creatures, were housed together to be used by the disciples for practicing. The red-crowned crane's flying speed was extremely fast, and he could feel its lightning-fast speed, because only after flying for about half an hour, they had crossed the entire mountain range. This had made him very certain that buying a crane was certainly not a bad idea. And by paying 1,000 points, he had saved a lot of time that he would have wasted by walking for several days to cover the same distance. The crane descended on a flat land, and after Yi Shiwen jumped off from its back, it again flapped its wings and flew high into the sky, waiting for the next summon from him. Yi Shiwen was surprised to actually hear the continuous roars of demon beasts one after the other in the entire mountain forest. And these roars were hoarse, sharp, low and deep, which could cause goosebumps to anyone who heard them. Occasionally, he would also see some disciples atop their demon birds flying in the sky. Yi Shiwen knew that time was running out, and he must break through as soon as possible, in order to face the challenges later. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate anymore, and with a burst of Zhen Qi under his feet, his body dashed towards the forest like a shell, and directly entered the forest. Soon, he had gently and swiftly passed innumerable big trees, and had entered the depths of the forest. Chapter 108. Practice in the forest. Yi Shiwen was standing on a tree branch. He had entered fairly deep into the mountain forest, and as he had gone deeper into the forest, the strength of the demon beasts had continued to increase as well. Although only Hotian-level demon beasts were present on the outer areas of the forest, but the weakest among them was only at the Hotian 7th or 8th stage, and compared to the average level of demon beasts present in the Qingfeng Mountain, this was a lot intense. Phew! A shrill piercing cry came out of nowhere, and a cold brightness flashed behind Yi Shiwen. He almost instinctively dodged and somersaulted to another tree, and at this time, he finally got a chance to look at what it was. It was a praying mantis, about 2 meters tall, covered with dark green outer shell, and its 2 giant blade-like forelegs were dancing, issuing a fabric tear-like sound in the surroundings. It had 2 thick and huge fangs pointing out of its mouth, which was densely covered with fine teeth, and could easily snap a steel bar with a single bite. It had 2 huge wings flapping on its back, blowing the wind high up in the sky. Seeing that Yi Shiwen had avoided its attack, the giant praying mantis gave out a loud scream, flapped its huge wings, and its huge figure instantly rushed with a lightning speed towards him. The pair of steel blade-like forelegs brandished instantly, and like 2 giant scissors, they approached to cut him. Unexpectedly, this attack was very much similar to martial arts technique. Praying mantis fist. This praying mantis clearly possessed wisdom and high intellect, because it was easily displaying the praying mantis fist, and one could see that its attacks and gestures looked similar to the praying mantis fist technique practiced by humans. The praying mantis had opened up the world bridge that had helped in circulating the Zhen Qi through the meridians present in its body. It had already entered into the Xiantian realm, and its fighting prowess was comparable to the warriors of peak Xiantian second stage. Its blade-like forelegs released a sharp bladiki, and instantly chopped out towards Yi Shiwen. "You filthy beast!" Yi Shiwen shouted, then took out his long blade, and instantly chopped out a terrifying bladiki towards the incoming bladiki released from the forelegs of praying mantis. Boom! The 2 shares of bladiki severely clashed and caused a huge explosion. But then, the terrifying bladiki released from Yi Shiwen's long blade dispersed the praying mantis bladiki and rushed forward. The eyes of praying mantis revealed an astonished look. It was a demon beast that had got wisdom after breaking through from Hotian realm to the Xiantian realm, which was definitely not easy for a demon beast, so it could feel that Yi Shiwen would not be so easy to deal with. The praying mantis immediately realized that although this human looked small, but it was definitely not an opponent it could take lightly. It didn't hesitate, and immediately flapped its wings, and flew into the air, to dodge the terrifying bladiki. "Want to escape?" Yi Shiwen sneered, and suddenly jumped up towards the praying mantis like a shell ejected from the cannon. Yi Shiwen's form was like an arrow, and immediately appeared in front of the praying mantis in the air. His terrifying Zhen Qi completely burst out, and after adjusting his stature in the midair, he took a stance and struck his long blade towards the mantis. A terrifying Daomong split the air, and instantly chopped out. Puchi! The tough dark green outer shell covering the body of praying mantis instantly shattered, and its whole body was split in half. Boom! The 2 halves of the huge body of praying mantis fell on the ground, and Yi Shiwen also landed on the ground with ease. He stored the entire body of the praying mantis in his space ring, as even the corpses of Xiantian-level demon beasts were considered as precious treasures. Its outer shell could be processed into armor, and its 2 blade-like forelimbs could be used to make high-quality long blades. Of course, he did not have the skill to make these weapons, but there were others who were quite skilled in making weapons from the bodies of demon beasts, and he could sell the corpse of praying mantis to them in exchange of some spirit stones. Although he won't get many spirit stones in exchange for praying mantis corpse, but as they say that many little drops make an ocean, Yi Shiwen did not stay, and was about to leave when suddenly, he heard the sound of flapping wings coming from the sky. A flock of carrion vultures had been attracted to the smell of blood, coming from the blood stains of praying mantis left on the ground. Most of these carrion vultures were at the Hotian 9th stage, nearly 2 meters tall, and wingspan of over 5 meters, and were hiding the sky and covering the earth. The leader of the flock was significantly taller than the others, and looked formidable, and its whole body was covered in golden yellow feather. It was none other than the golden carrion vulture king. Although this was a small flock of carrion vultures, and was definitely not the strongest ones present in the forest, but this area of the forest was their territory. When these carrion vultures couldn't find the body of praying mantis, they suddenly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Many of the carrion vultures flocked together on him, and their sharp claws fiercely approached to tear him apart. If he was an average person, then he would have instantly been torn to shreds. These beasts! Yi Shiwen shouted and instantly chopped out his long blade. 9 blade shadows appeared and rushed towards the flock of carrion vultures, and several carrion vultures were instantly split in half by this terrifying large-scale blade attack. Yi Shiwen continued to attack relentlessly while his long blade kept on dancing in his hand, and releasing blade shadows horizontally and vertically towards the flock. Yi Zaiwen's blade attacks were so incredible that none of the carrion vultures could bear even a single attack. Even their leader, a Xiantian realm carrion vulture, was not a match of Yi Shiwen. He would effortlessly wave his blade, and several carrion vultures would fall down, chopped in pieces. These carrion vultures had surrounded Yi Shiwen like huge black clouds, and were crying out strange, terrifying sounds which could send chills down the spines of anyone who would hear them. Yi Zaiwen's figure flashed and moved gracefully while his blade waved, and released a bright blade light, which completely wrapped him in a sphere of light without leaving any gap. There was no way left for the carrion vultures to approach him, and those who tried to get close to him were instantly chopped down in pieces and fell on the ground. Yi Zaiwen's long blade was constantly dancing in his hand, releasing a terrifying blade light everywhere. Those carrion vultures didn't get any chance to dodge, and met their tragic deaths, while screaming pitifully. After a while, hundreds of mighty carrion vultures had been slaughtered and turned into a pile of chopped-up corpses, leaving only the golden carrion vulture king. When he saw how Yi Shiwen had killed his own people, the golden carrion vulture king got extremely furious and flew towards Yi Shiwen with an incredibly fast speed, with its golden body resembling a golden arrow rushing towards him. Yi Zaiwen's blade chopped out a dazzling blade light. Clang! The blade light fiercely crashed into the body of golden carrion vulture king, producing a metal clashing sound. However, his body was abnormally sturdy, as if it was made of iron, and wasn't chopped down in pieces like the other carrion vultures. However, after taking Yi Zaiwen's blade attack head-on, the golden carrion vulture felt dizzy, and his body was blasted away and fiercely crashed into a tree. Yi Zaiwen's eyes flashed and his stature instantly soared towards the golden carrion vulture king, and he immediately chopped down his blade. Poochie! Although the body of golden carrion vulture king was extremely tough, but this time, Yi Shiwen directly used his blade to sever the head of the golden carrion vulture king from his body. Yi Shiwen relaxed, but there were just too many corpses of these carrion vultures, so he decided to take only the demon cores. This level of practice is not enough to have a breakthrough. I must work harder. Chapter 109. Snow Ape. In an instant, 3 days had already passed, and within these 3 days, Yi Shiwen had went deeper into the mountain forest, and had also encountered numerous demon beasts. He didn't know the names of many of these demon beasts, and some of them had attacked together in groups. He also encountered many demon beasts with their fighting strength comparable to that of the masters of Peak Xiantian 3rd stage. During these 3 days, Yi Shiwen didn't get a tiny bit of relaxation time, and the more he wanted to have a breakthrough, the more he would force himself into tempering his body and inner state in the most extreme situations. But he was not in a hurry, because he had not yet received any message from the Yin Qiliang. He and Yin Qiliang had already decided that if something happened, then Yin Qiliang would immediately tell him using the subpoena talisman, and Yi Shiwen would immediately fly on his red-crowned crane and rush back at maximum speed. Therefore, Yi Shiwen was not anxious at the moment, and was practicing in the forest without worrying about the safety of his comrades. But he had to deal with his own worries. During these 3 days, he hadn't dared to take rest, because if he had decided to rest and had lost attention even for an instant, then perhaps he would really lose his life the very next instant. This forest was the most dangerous environment he had experienced so far, and even the dangerous environment of Huanma territory was nothing compared to this, let alone the forest on the backside of Qingfeng Mountain. There were a lot of terrifyingly strong demon beasts present in this forest, and even the slightest carelessness could cause death. Several times, Yi Shiwen had encountered danger in this forest, although he had continued to go deeper into the forest for 3 days. But as a result of constantly encountering demon beasts, as well as his careful advancement through the forest, he had not actually advanced too deep, and was still in the outermost region. However, even if he was still in the outer region of the forest, it was still packed with a large number of Xiantian realm demon beasts. Wandering in this region for the last 3 days, he had not seen a single Hotian realm demon beast, And the reason for that was it was impossible for Hotian Ream demon beasts to survive in this region of the forest. Yi Shiwen was sure that once he would go deeper into the forest, he would definitely encounter Xiantian 5th stage demon beasts or above, and he suspected that even the Zhendao realm demon beasts were present in the deeper parts of the forest. Zhendao realm disciples would come to practice in this forest all year round, so it could be guessed that there definitely were a lot of Zhendao realm demon beasts lurking in the deeper parts of this forest. However, this was only his speculation, and he did not have the evidence to back it up. Within these 3 days, Yi Shiwen had faced many life and death situations, and had still continued to practice in order to have a breakthrough, and this kind of practice had shown great benefits. Now he had arrived at the peak of transformation of 60% Xiantian Jinqi. He felt as if there was a big reservoir of water in his body, filled to the brink, and with every movement of his body, he would have a feeling as if the water would pour out from the reservoir. He was very familiar with this kind of feeling, as this was a sign that he was very close to having a breakthrough. Yi Shiwen was jumping from one branch to the other when suddenly, hail started to fall down from the sky without any prior indication or warning. Yi Shiwen immediately propped up his Jinqi, as he had become very used to during these 3 days. It was said that a formidable demon beast could induce a change in the weather. Not to mention there were so many formidable demon beasts lurking in this forest. Fortunately, the good thing was that this sudden weather change was on a limited scale, and was definitely caused by a demon beast of limited ability, so it would be easy for him to leave this affected area, and avoid confronting the demon beast behind it. The size of the hail grew bigger and bigger, and the nearby trees directly bent after getting hit by these hails, but didn't collapse down. After all, these trees had been nourished after getting subjected to divine Lingqi day and night, and although it could not be said that these trees were similar to other Lingqi-rich treasures, but they were still strong enough to bear this hailstorm. However, it didn't go as he had planned, because he couldn't escape from the scope of this hailstorm, and ran right into the demon beast. That was the reason behind this sudden weather change. It was actually a snow ape. It was a giant demon beast with a huge body, 3 meters tall. Its whole body was covered with snow-white hair, and there was an aggressive look on its face. Yi Shiwen immediately realized that this hailstorm was caused because this snow ape was having a breakthrough, and had just broken through to the Xiantian 4th stage, and since his breath was still unstable, he had lost control over its powers, and had caused this unusual change in the weather of the surrounding area. Roar! Snow ape hammered its huge fists on its chest and roared wildly, again agitating the surrounding weather by suddenly causing a blizzard, spreading the wind and snow in all directions. Each of its punches would cause air explosions producing a rumbling down, and would also induce a snowstorm in the surroundings. It seemed as if this snow ape had practiced a fist technique, and this was actually the fist technique of the snow apes, although the movement was very simple, but it was extremely powerful and heavy. Snow ape's eyes were firmly locked onto Yi Shiwen, and there was an ominous look in its eyes. After all, he had dared to enter into its territory. But Yi Shiwen noticed that it had an eager expression on its face, along with a hint of excitement mixed with it. Yi Shiwen was surprised for a moment. Although he had seen many wise Xiantian demon beasts that possessed high intellect, but he had never seen a demon beast like Snow Ape, who was showing such an anthropomorphic expression on its face. Even he could make out that this Snow Ape was excited at the moment, and it was said that the stronger a demon beast was, the greater its intellect would be. Not to mention, the ape-class demon beasts were considered closest to the humanity. Yi Shiwen now clearly understood that this Snow Ape had just now broken through to the Xiantian 4th stage, and was looking to have a match with him. Yi Shiwen was still thinking how to deal with this Snow Ape when suddenly, its fist punched out a terrible blast of snow and ice, made up of its Jinqi, which instantly rumbled towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen did not dare to take Snow Ape's attack too lightly, as after having a breakthrough it had become a demon beast of Xiantian 4th stage. He immediately pulled out his long blade and chopped out. Boom! Yi Shiwen launched his blade attack towards the snowstorm rushing towards him, and the collision instantly set off a terrifying blast which blasted away Yi Shiwen into the air, and his body was instantly frozen stiff. Yi Shiwen quickly released this stiffness by circulating the Zhen Qi throughout his body, but at this time, it could be seen from its facial expression that the snow ape was getting more and more excited. It rushed forward, trotting on the ground while making huge footprints, and then pounced on Yi Shiwen. The movements of snow ape were extremely quick, and it looked like a white lightning when it instantly threw itself in front of Yi Shiwen. At this instant, in Yi Zaiwen's eyes, it appeared as if a huge snow-covered mountain had suddenly appeared right in front of him. But he didn't get enough time to react as its furry huge fist immediately punched out with a burst of cold air. The snow ape continued to throw its ice-cold punches relentlessly one after the other at Yi Shiwen, without giving him any chance to recuperate. The terrifying coercive aura of snow ape was firmly locked on him, and combined with its ice-cold presence, it was very hard for him to breathe. Yi Shiwen shouted and shot out his palm. Hidden dragon rises from the abyss. Roar! Soon, a gigantic dragon instantly congealed out of his palm and leapt high into the sky, then it descended towards the snow ape. Boom! The gigantic dragon malicious collided with the arm of snow ape that it had lifted up to block. Kara! Snow ape's arm directly broke under the tremendous might of coiling dragon palm. Chapter 110, Breakthrough in Battle. Kara. Snow ape's arm directly broke under the tremendous might of coiling dragon palm. A startled look flashed on the face of the snow ape. It never expected that a single strike from Yi Shiwen could actually fracture its arm. Yi Shiwen slightly gasped for breath, as this move had just now consumed 10% of his Xiantian Jin Qi. Although the might of this move was very large, but even so, it couldn't kill the snow ape and could only fracture its arm. This snow ape was really formidable. However, Yi Zaiwen's blood had begun to boil up and seethe with excitement. At present, his current strength was enough to easily defeat the masters of peak Xiantian 3rd stage, and he could even contend with the masters of early Xiantian 4th stage. And right now, his opponent was a snow ape that had just broken into the Xiantian 4th stage and had yet to consolidate its strength. So this time, two opponents of rivaling strengths had met in battle, so it was bound to be exciting for both of them. The perfect opponents. Snow Ape had come to realize that Yi Zaiwen's strength was ridiculously large, and it couldn't fight recklessly with him. With another Kara sound, the broken bone in its arm returned back to its original position, and suddenly, it pulled out a giant stick out of nowhere, and jumped towards Yi Shiwen, and smashed the stick, which released numerous shadows. And one could see that it contained the essence of the stick technique, which was stronger compared to the snow ape fist technique. It was obvious that this snow ape had practiced the stick technique to a very profound level. Yi Shiwen did not hesitate, and took out his long blade and chopped out. Boom! A bright daomong released from the blade and clashed fiercely with the stick Jinmeng, and with a bang, a loud thunder-like sound spread in the surrounding area. Both sides had to step back, because their equally powerful attacks couldn't do anything to the other side. Yi Shiwen dashed forward, and his figure instantly shot out like a shell, and collided with the snow ape. Boom! 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 An intermittent bursts of huge collision sounds spread while both of them were trying all they could to press down the other one. Snow Ape finally realized that this time, his selection of opponent was wrong, and didn't seem like a good deal. One could say that it had chosen a wrong opponent this time, because initially it had thought that he would prove to be a very good opponent to test its newly obtained strength of Xiantian 4th stage. But now, it had become difficult for the snow ape to deal with a formidable opponent like Yi Shiwen. However, an ominous aura completely broke out from deep inside the blood vessels of its beastly body, and at this moment, its initially unstable state, after continuously fighting with Yi Shiwen, had begun to show signs of consolidation. The snow ape lifted its face upward and began to roar loudly and ferociously. Yi Shiwen couldn't take this lightly, because if snow ape continued to consolidate its state, then its strength would increase dramatically. But he had earned a great deal of benefit by fighting with this snow ape, because after his unceasing collisions with it, at this moment, the initial sturdy barrier on his inner state had slowly begun to loosen up, and his strength had started to rise. The strength of both sides was rising continuously, and the collisions between them had still continued. Both sides were enduring patiently, hoping to completely crush the opposite party in the next attack. Yi Shiwen was not very anxious, as he knew that the snow ape was going to reach its limit very soon, and once the consolidation of its state would complete, the rise in its strength would come to a stop. But his case was different, as he could still have a breakthrough, and after having the breakthrough, his strength would increase by leaps and bounds, and then he would be able to kill it. At that time, let alone a demon beast of early Xiantian 4th stage, even the demon beasts of peak Xiantian 4th stage would be easily defeated by him. Snow Ape had never felt so aggrieved. It was already at the Xiantian 4th stage, but it had still been unable to overwhelm a mere human of Xiantian 2nd stage. It was very proud of its unparalleled tough body, but it still couldn't fully prevail over Yi Shiwen. In fact, it had a faint feeling of getting suppressed instead. It didn't know that Yi Shiwen had practiced Tyrant's body technique, and this was the reason why he possessed such a tough body. This was an unparalleled ancient technique used by the ancient tyrant gods to train their bodies. Although Yi Shiwen had practiced it to the second layer, but the toughness of his body had already increased to a very high level. Snow Ape was at a far higher cultivation level compared to Yi Shiwen, but it had still been unable to completely suppress him, and it had also sensed that he had slowly started to become stronger. Moreover, his breath was rising constantly, and had started to become more and more thick, which clearly indicated that Yi Shiwen was about to have a breakthrough. Cannot let this human have a breakthrough. A thought echoed in its mind, though it couldn't speak, but its wisdom had increased to a considerable extent after reaching the Xiantian 4th stage, and it could clearly feel how dangerous it would be if Yi Shiwen was allowed to have a breakthrough. Snow Ape no longer hesitated and waved its huge stick, covered in ice-cold aura, which immediately froze the air, and it seemed as if the surrounding area had turned into a world of snow and ice. The huge stick had yet to arrive near Yi Shiwen, but that kind of enormous breath and cold atmosphere fiercely pounded with an irresistible force, as if a huge iceberg had smashed down in front of him. This coercive aura put intense pressure on Yi Shiwen's body, and his bones started to produce crackling sounds, as the result of his bones rubbing against each other. Yi Shiwen sneered, and the Zhen Qi began to madly surge inside his body. The long blade danced in his hand, and chopped out a dazzling daomang. The two imposing attacks met in the midair, staggered, and fiercely collided with each other, causing the Zhen Qi and Yao Qi to mutually evaporate in the air, and erupted the smoke and fireworks everywhere. Yi Shiwen's daomang, bit by bit, collapsed under the pressure of Snow Ape's iceberg-like stick, and it pressed down on his body. An enormous imposing aura suddenly broke out like a hurricane from his body, and his original inner state at the peak of Xiantian 2nd stage with 60% transformed Xiantian Zhen Qi, under the intense pressure of this imposing aura, transformed an additional 20% Xiantian Zhen Qi inside his body, reaching 80% Xiantian Zhen Qi, which was now comparable to the transformation of a master at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage. Rising straight from 60% transformed Xiantian Zhen Qi to 80% Xiantian Zhen Qi, Yi Shiwen's aura immediately changed, and the daomang that had initially collapsed started to reappear, and became even powerful than before. And it suddenly crashed into the iceberg, and shattered it into ice fragments, which were sent fluttering about in the air. Chapter 111. Jing Yin, and a panic-stricken facial expression appeared on the face of the Snow Ape, and it was looking at Yi Shiwen with a look of horror in its eyes. After having a breakthrough, his fighting strength had suddenly increased to such an extent that now it could be compared with the strength of masters at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage. How could this human become so formidable after having a breakthrough? This also symbolized that the battle efficiency of Yi Shiwen had also made a new breakthrough. However, the Snow Ape was unwilling to give up. This beast was very clever, and it wanted to take advantage of Yi Shiwen's unstable inner state that had yet to consolidate. It was looking for an opportunity to catch him off guard and kill him. A cunning and deceitful look flashed in the blood-red eyes of the Snow Ape, but Yi Shiwen did not make it wait for too long, and chopped out his long blade, which blossomed out brilliant glorious bladiki, shadowing the sky. Yi Zaiwen's blade technique had become even more fearsome, and even the snow ape had to go all out with rapt attention in the face of this blade attack. The snow ape roared and the snow and ice start swirling in the air, and gathered in front of it to form an ice wall, in order to resist Yi Zaiwen's blade attack. But this ice wall's defense didn't live up to Snow Ape's expectation, and in an instant, it was cut down into two parts as if cutting a slip of paper and collapsed down under the formidable power of Yi Zaiwen's Daomang. Puchi, the dazzling Daomang, cut into the body of Snow Ape, and chopped its iron-like tough body into two halves, causing its blood to splatter, and its flesh to fly in all directions. It died an instant death with an inconceivable look in its eyes. It had just reached the Xiantian 4th stage, and had yet to run amok to enjoy the newly gained strength, but it did a blunder by choosing a wrong opponent, and the result was that it was split in half in a single blade attack. Yi Shiwen relaxed, and thought that this snow ape was really very formidable, and if he had not reached the peak of Xiantian's 2nd stage, then it would be very difficult to deal with it. But, after this, a look of joy flashed in his eyes. After all, he had finally reached the peak of Xiantian's 2nd stage. Not just that, he was quite surprised to find out that in just one breakthrough, 80% of the Houtian Jin Qi inside his body had transformed into the Xiantian Jin Qi, and now, he could easily contend with the master at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage. The next step would be the so-called complete transformation of 100% Houtian Jin Qi into Xiantian Jin Qi. Then suddenly, a ray of light dropped from the sky, and Yi Shiwen lifted his hand to receive it. It was a message from Yan Qiliang that was received by the summoning talisman. Yi Shiwen used his Jin Qi to probe inside the talisman, and a bunch of information instantly poured into his mind. It was a message from Yan Qiliang. Yi Shiwen didn't waste any time, and immediately whistled. The very next instant, the red crown quickly flew down from the sky. For the last 3 days, it had been hovering in the air, ready and waiting to answer the summon call from Yi Shiwen. Riding the red crown crane at maximum speed, within half an hour, Yi Shiwen returned to the main sect. Yi Shiwen frowned because, just as he had expected, those people from other factions wouldn't give up that easily, and had finally come after their Qianyu faction, though not all factions were hostile against them. There were a lot of factions with varying strengths. Some factions were very strong, especially those created by the true disciples, but they only accepted core disciples as members of their factions, or extraordinarily talented inner or outer disciples. The moderately powerful factions accepted new disciples and inner disciples as members, and those factions at the bottom of hierarchy accepted outer disciples, and even some handyman disciples in their factions. So fortunately, the Qianyu faction created by the new disciples hadn't made all of the factions as its enemy, but even so, it had to face 3 of 4 hostile factions belonging to the Tongtian Peak, as they originally were the competitors. However, this time, they had joined forces to suppress Qianyu faction. Whenever a faction would rise in power, it would generally face resistance from other factions. After Yi Shiwen hurried back to the Tongtian Peak, he didn't see the large number of disciples at the gate, as mentioned in the message sent by Yan Qiliang on his summoning talisman. He was not much worried about the safety of the new disciples. After all, inside the premises of the main sect, those senior disciples wouldn't dare to be too presumptuous, though they might try to bully and oppress the new disciples. But no one would dare to go as far as to kill someone, because once a life was taken, it would probably alarm the high-level personnel. In general, the high-level senior disciples didn't bully the new disciples, and as long as the new disciples didn't cause too much trouble, they wouldn't directly intervene. In their eyes, this was part of the discipline that must be followed in the sect, and they weren't generally interested in mediocre disciples. They were only interested in talented, outstanding disciples, because the existence of one outstanding disciple was far more important to them, compared to 1,000 mediocre disciples. Therefore, Yi Shiwen wasn't expecting to see a very bad situation, and wanted to hurry back in order to stop the situation from escalating. These rival factions needed to know that Qianyu faction wasn't made up of weak people, and they could fight back if needed. Yi Shiwen reached the Tongtian Peak and was surprised to find Yan Qiliang talking to a handsome youth clad in elegant Chinese robe. "Brother Yan, what's this all about?" Yi Shiwen asked Yan Qiliang in a surprised tone, because he had frantically sent the message to Yi Shiwen some time ago. But now, the things looked pretty normal to him. Seeing that Yi Shiwen had come back, Yan Qiliang's face lighted up, and that handsome youth looked at Yi Shiwen with a surprised and curious look in his eyes. Yan Qiliang smiled and said, "Brother Yi, this time, we were lucky that Brother Jing came to help us out." After listening to the explanation of Yan Qiliang, Yi Shiwen finally came to understand that a large number of senior disciples had arrived at the gate, and Yan Qiliang had panicked and had frantically messaged Yi Shiwen. But this handsome youth named Jing Yannan came to mediate between them, and the opposite party agreed to a temporary truce. "I want to thank Brother Jing for your help this time." Yi Shiwen cupped one hand over the other across his chest and said in a respectful manner, "No harm. I came at the request of someone to help you." Jing Yannan smiled and said. Yi Shiwen was confused as he couldn't make a guess. Who would actually send help for him? Noticing the confused look on Yi Ziwen's face, Yan Qiliang smiled and said, "You don't need to guess because I will gladly tell you who it was. It was actually Sister Hua who sent us help this time." Chapter 112 Battle After a Month. "I want to thank Senior Jing for your help this time." Yi Shiwen cupped one hand over the other across his chest and said in a respectful manner, "No harm. I came at the request of someone to help you." Jing Yannan smiled and said. Yi Shiwen was confused as he couldn't make a guess. Who would actually send him help? Noticing the confused look on Yi Ziwen's face, Yan Qiliang smiled and said, "You don't need to guess because I will gladly tell you who it was. It was actually Sister Hua who sent us help this time." Hua Menghan. This name immediately cropped up in his mind. He never thought that it would actually be Hua Menghan to send him help. At present, the beautiful figure of Hua Menghan seemed to have appeared in the imagination of Yi Shiwen. The news about this matter has spread outside? Yi Shiwen didn't allow his imagination to go astray thinking about the beautiful Hua Menghan, and directly asked, "Certainly, considering the involvement of your Qianyu faction in recent incidents, the new disciples of your faction are out in the limelight, and now among the Yiyuan School's 10 peaks. Who does not know that a group of audacious newcomers have shown up in the Tongtian Peak?" Jing Yannan said with a faint smile on his face, and his voice seemed to have a touch of ridicule. Yan Qiliang's complexion immediately changed as gaining limelight so early was not a good thing for him, as the leader of Qianyu faction. "You are not the first generation of disciples to do such a thing. In the past, one generation of new disciples had tried the same thing and finally entered the Zhendao realm and gained huge popularity, but gaining so much power and popularity corrupted them, and ultimately, things turned out to be very miserable." Jing Yannan said and curiously looked at Yi Shiwen, as if trying to know what kind of person he really was by reading his reaction. "A mighty king defeats the invaders," Yi Shiwen said in an indifferent manner. "Ha, mighty king defeats the invaders, well said," Jing Yannan exclaimed and said. "This year's disciples are really different from the past, but your determination and strength is still not enough. Although I helped you this time and forced them to retreat, but they won't stay down for too long, and will come after you once again. And at that time, you will have to be capable enough to help yourselves." Senior Jing helped in getting rid of them, even once is more than enough for us, and we are very grateful, Yan Qiliang said in a polite tone. Yi Shiwen now had a clear understanding of the mindset of these senior factions, especially those factions that were forcing the new disciples to become their members, and were sparing no effort to suppress the Qianyu faction. This was more like a warning to other new disciples indicating that if they tried to form their own factions, then the development of their factions would be seriously affected. The new batch of disciples was an important source of members for these senior factions, and they would go to any extent to suppress the new factions, just to crush any future rivalry and loss of members. Jing Yannan did not stay, and soon went back. Yan Qiliang somewhat smiled wryly, because he never imagined that setting up a new faction would be so difficult, and the interference of senior disciples had made his life difficult as the leader of Qianyu faction. As far as those covetously eyeing senior disciples were concerned, if only he had few more years to cultivate, at least 10 more years, then his strength would have rapid progress. At that time, forming a faction would not be so difficult. In fact, it would come as a natural thing. However, he was not willing to give up, because Qianyu faction was formed just recently, so why must they dissolve it? Brother Yi, this time, Senior Jing came to our rescue, but the other side has put forward a condition. 1 month later, the deputy main of Fudi faction, Emo Han, will come back, and as long as we can beat him, then in the future, no one will embarrass our Qianyu faction. However, if we can't beat Emo Han, then Qianyu faction must be dissolved. Yan Qiliang said in a somewhat aggrieved tone. What's the background of this Emo Han? Yi Xuan asked because from what he knew so far, Fudi faction had been started by a core disciple, so it was obvious that the deputy main would not be an average disciple. This Emo Han joined the main sect 2 batches before us, which means 6 years ago, and at that time, he became an extremely dazzling talent among the new disciples, and in just a short time of 6 years, he reached the peak of Xiantian 5th stage, and became a seed disciple among the inner disciples. It is said that he is very strong, and recognizing his talent, the Fudi faction made an exception to appoint him as deputy main. He is the only inner disciple among the several deputy mains of the Fudi faction, and all other deputy mains are core disciples. Yan Qiliang explained, talented people always got preferential treatment, which reflected in all aspects, and Emo Han's case was the best example of that. I am not willing to give up, Yan Qiliang said in an irritated manner. If only he had few more years, then he was confident that his own strength wouldn't be far too less compared to that of Emo Han. However, he didn't have that much time, as what could he accomplish in just 1 month? You leave this thing to me. 1 month later, I will battle with Emo Han. Yi Xuan said. You. Yan Qiliang looked somewhat unbelievably at Yi Xuan. It was not that he suspected the might of Yi Xuan, and having such an incredible strength at a young age was unusual indeed, and proved that Yi Xuan was truly a genius, but he still couldn't believe that Yi Xuan could be victorious against Emo Han. Rest assured, trust me and let me handle this matter, Yi Xuan said, and thought to himself that this thing wouldn't have been so easy to handle, but with the interference of Hua Menghan and Jing Yinnan, who came forward to moderate between the two sides, it could be said that it had saved Yi Xuan a lot of trouble, because now, as long as he could beat this so-called genius Emo Han, Qianyu faction would get recognition from the other factions, and people would stop to come looking for trouble, and in that case, he would have enough time for enhancing his own strength. If the battle between him and Emo Han took place right now, then it was obvious that he wouldn't stand a chance against Emo Han. But the battle was going to take place a month later, and at time, the situation would be completely different. Right now, Yi Xuan was at the peak of Xiantian 2nd stage, and his fighting strength was comparable to that of the masters at the peak of Xiantian 4th stage. Although it could be said that he had shown the fastest progress among all the new disciples, but his current strength was still not enough to confront Emo Han. However, if he used the Xian Jindan, then his strength would increase by leaps and bounds in a short time, and he would directly reach the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, and at that time, he would be able to easily contend with the master at the peak of Xiantian 5th stage. So the showdown with Emo Han would not be a problem at all. But it was going to take time because Xian Jindan was a strong drug and gave extraordinary effects, but it took a lot of time to fully consume it. Fortunately, he had got 1 month's time to prepare for the battle. A month later, let me take care of that Emo Han, Yi Xuan said. Yan Qiliang was somewhat puzzled at such display of confidence by Yi Xuan, because even with the help of Xian Jindan, in his view, Yi Xuan's strength would not increase to such an extent that he would be able to compete with Emo Han. He did not know that Yi Xuan had just made a huge breakthrough, but Yi Xuan did not explain, and went straight back to his own courtyard, and began the closed-door practice. Chapter 113. I bet 5,000 on Yi Zaiwen's victory. 1 month passed in an instant, and in this month, Qianyu faction became the center of attention of many high-level and low-level disciples of Tongtian Peak. And not just that, some of the high-level personnel also paid attention to this matter. And Yi Zaiwen's name didn't just become famous among the new disciples, but all of a sudden, a lot of people had come to know of his name. From the rumors, they had also become aware of the fact that new disciples had formed a new faction named Qianyu faction, and a showdown was going to take place for its sake. The name Qianyu had appeared for the first time in the hearts of many people. However, many people were not optimistic about the development of this new faction, because they knew that Yi Shiwen was going to battle with Emo Han. And no one could imagine the victory of Yi Shiwen. After all, Yi Shiwen was just a new disciple, but Emo Han was considered a famous inner disciple, and had also entered among the rankings of seed disciples. Although from the last, but there were several thousand inner disciples in the main sect, and among them, there were only 100 or so seed disciples. So one could see how powerful Emo Han actually was. For the inner disciples, this was their most essential goal, because as long as they could become one of the few seed disciples, then they could get a lot of school resources. In any of the great sects, talented disciples would always be favored, and were given more resources and better care, compared to ordinary disciples. And no one thought that this was improper, because everyone was like that. Among several thousand inner disciples, being able to attain the rank among the 100 seed disciples, one could imagine the intensity of competition. Even if Emo Han had barely squeezed into the ranks of seed disciples from the bottom. But this was enough to accept the fact that he was extraordinarily strong. And many people were betting on the victory of Emo Han. Because looking at his talent, it was only a matter of time when he would actually occupy a higher rank among the seed disciples. But who was Yi Shiwen? He was merely a new disciple who joined the main sect this year. Although he was considered an extraordinary talent among the new disciples, but his cultivation time was very short. If this battle took place few years later, then no one would be able to make a guess about the victor. But right now, no one was betting on Yi Zaiwen's victory. Once Yi Shiwen was defeated, then the newly formed Qianyu faction would completely fall apart, and would be disbanded according to the terms of the battle. The day of the battle finally arrived, and on this day, the life and death arena of the Tongtian Peak drew a huge crowd, and many disciples came to surround the arena. According to the rules of Yiyuan School, life and death battles were only allowed in the life and death arena, and even if a disciple was to die during the battle, it wouldn't violate the regulation of the school. This arena was built for the disciples who wanted to solve their personal hatred through battles, and as long as both sides were willing to participate, they would themselves control their own life and death, generally speaking, unless there was a bitter hatred and grudge between the two parties. They were not allowed to battle in the life and death arena. Yiyuan School didn't want to evade the fact that in the world of martial artists, hatred and misgivings were inevitable, and it was better for them to sort it out in a fair battle in the life and death arena, rather than using unfair means to stab each other's back. Every day, disciples would resolve their grudges and grievances in the life and death arena. But today's battle was one of the most popular ones, and had attracted a large crowd. They had come to see the battle between the most famous new disciple, who was representing the new disciples and their newly formed faction, and a famous inner disciple, who had recently joined the ranks of seed disciples, and was representing the senior disciples and their factions. For a long time, this kind of situation had not appeared, and everyone was curious and excited. Come, the battle's going to start soon. Bet on Yi Zaiwen's win. If lost, then compensation is 10. Bet on Emo Han's win. If lost, then compensation is 0. 5. A disciple had opened up a gambling house on the side, and was shouting loudly. Many disciples started to bet, and looking at the odds of the battle, most of them bet on Emo Han's victory, as no one wanted to take a risk, and bet on Yi Zaiwen's victory, even though the compensation of 10 was very high, because it was no different than betting on a miracle. This is so hateful. How dare you look down on our little brother? A female voice came out from the crowd. Standing in the crowd, there was a pretty woman, and appeared to be 20 years old. On her side, stood a handsome youth who appeared to be 23 or 24 years old. They were actually Yi Ruxue and Yi Feng, the two elder siblings of Yi Shiwen. Today, not just the people of Tongtian Peak had gathered around the life and death arena, because this battle had attracted the attention of a lot of people, even from the other 9 peaks. Many disciples from the other 9 peaks had rushed over early in the morning to watch this battle. Yi Ruxue and Yi Feng would naturally come to watch their little brothers fight. In addition to them, the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool had also come to cheer for Yi Shiwen, because no matter what, he was considered the top disciple of their subschool and had saved them many times. And not just the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. The new disciples of other subschools had also come to watch this battle, because in this battle, Yi Shiwen was not just representing the Qianyu faction, but all of the new disciples, and he was also a symbol of resistance against the tyranny of senior disciples. All the eyes were fixated on the arena, curiously anticipating the outcome of the battle. Seeing the anger seething on Yi Ruxue's face, Yi Feng smiled wryly, because this was quite normal. Nobody was betting on Yi Ziwen's victory, and the reason was quite obvious to everyone, of course, except Yi Ruxue, because somehow, she always had a lot of confidence on her little brother. Standing beside the two siblings were Yin Qiliang and Zhang Sun Yuan, and others who were on good terms with Yi Shiwen, and had come to watch his battle. These senior disciples are really bunch of snobs, Yin Qiliang whispered angrily. Yin Qiliang walked up to the front row of the audience and placed his bet. I bet 300 spirit stones on Yi Ziwen's victory. Yin Qiliang gritted his teeth, but Yi Shiwen was going to fight for the dignity of the new disciples and their faction. So right now, all he could do was show his support. I bet 400. Another loud voice followed the voice of Yin Qiliang, and it belonged to Yi Feng. I bet on Yi Ziwen's victory. I bet 100. Yi Ruxue clenched her teeth and said, I bet 30. I bet 10. Seeing this, several top disciples also bet on Yi Ziwen's victory, and many new disciples also joined them, and bet in favor of Yi Shiwen. The disciple responsible in the gambling house gave somewhat dumbfounded looks to the people who were betting in favor of Yi Shiwen. He just couldn't understand what made these new disciples to suddenly go crazy, and they started betting on Yi Ziwen's victory, which was simply impossible. Did not they know that they would lose everything? Although the compensation of 10 looked very attractive if won, but there was no chance of winning for Yi Shiwen. So how could they even dare to bet, when they knew that they could lose 10 times the bet they were placing? These country bumpkins! The disciples secretly laughed, but there a look of enthusiasm on his face, as he warmly received the spirit stones from the new disciples. And with 11 registrations in favor of Yi Shiwen, he also started to look forward to seeing the faces of these country bumpkins once they would lose their bets. Although with one look, it seemed that these people were stupid to be betting on a miracle, but even if they had bet in favor of Mo Han, they wouldn't have won back much with only the compensation of 0. 5. So even if they were fools, it was better to try their luck for once rather than playing it safe. Who else wants to bet? Hurry up, the duel is about to start. The disciple shouted. I bet 5,000 on Yi Ziwen's victory. A slim cyan figure appeared at the entrance. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.